Call the meeting to order. Special meeting of the Wilmington City Council is a budget work session. And at this time, I am going to take a roll call. Mayor Pro Tem, are you here?
Here.
Councilman Rathmar? Councilmember Spears? Councilmember Spears? Councilmember Waddell?
Here.
Councilmember Andrews?
Here.
Councilmember Joyner?
Here.
The chair is here. So we do have a quorum, all being accounted for. I'll turn it over now to our city manager, Mr. Collins.
Any questions?
Plenty.
So maybe we kind of shorten this process a bit. Good morning, Council, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem. We appreciate your time, as always, to sit with us and work on this budget. This is, of course, as I emphasize every time we meet, the most important thing you do all year long. And so we appreciate you dedicating some time to do it. The agenda looks relatively brief. Hopefully we will be out of here shortly after lunch, if not a little bit before. But we have some very meaty topics that we need to speak with you about and get some direction on today. As you know, during our last, workshop, we had questions about the compensation package. And we provided you a great deal of information in these materials to talk about the compensation package. And I suspect Clayton's going to get portion before the end of the day, but he's got a good deal of information to go over with you about that. After you get this information, we'll seek some direction from you with regard to the course of action you'd like for us to follow in addressing these issues. Following that, we will also have a review of our CIP. This is an ongoing 5-year CIP, but this is our
Turn the sound off.
This is our opportunity to make adjustments in that CIP as necessary in order to be able to accomplish, excuse me, what it is that the city wants to accomplish over the course of the planning period. Once we give you that information, we will again solicit information from you as a collective whole as to what you would like to see. And then finally, we'll like to solicit input from you again as a whole of what you'd like to see included in the budget. Of course, by the time we get to the end of this morning, you'll see there's not a whole lot of money left in terms of ability to be able to do expansion items, but we may be able to move items around within expenditures to be able to accomplish things that have changed as you have worked on this over the course of the past year. So hopefully we'll be able to provide an early picture where we stand with regard to the expenditures and the revenues, and then finally close with some general feedback from you. The city attorney does have some information regarding the towing matter that came up at the agenda, or excuse me, at the regular meeting last week, and so she'll be going over that at the end of the meeting. With that, I'll be glad to entertain any first questions, or I just as soon give it to Clayton and let him start working on this. Clayton? Clayton, hi.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, members of council. So just start out reminding you all why we're here. This is a follow-up from your November 7th, 2024 budget work session. And in your packet should be a copy of that presentation that I may refer back to throughout this morning. But you asked us to follow up with the workforce demographics, an update on where we are with turnover and vacancy rates. And we have this data through the first half of the year, so for the first 6 months. And then we're going to have a conversation about employee compensation, talk about public safety proposals for mid-year adjustments, bringing our pay bands in line with our benchmark peers. And then we'll talk about STEP plans. Mary Vigue is going to walk you through an example and talk about some of the challenges with implementing and maintaining STEP plans. We'll talk about a promotional pay policy that council asked us to look into. And then we'll talk about a cancer policy. We did do in the last couple months, my team did a study for our exempt and hourly positions. So I will present the results of that later in the presentation. And lastly, we'll finish talking about our benefits. We have put together a proposal for FY26 as well as a multi-year approach going forward to make our benefits more competitive. So I'm going to jump right in with looking at our workforce demographics. You'll notice majority white, 75%, black at 6.7%, almost 17%. On the next slide, I'll show you how we compare the community. We have, as when this data was pulled, this is a point in time, beginning of January, 1,093 employees. predominantly male dominated with police, fire, public works, parks. Those are generally male dominated service industries. This chart right here is looking at how we compare to the city residents, New Hanover County, and the state. You can see we are in line. Our goal is to represent the community that we serve. And in terms of white and black population, we do represent the community, the city, and the county. Two areas where we're underrepresented would be two or more races and Hispanic. We've tried to make some headway in those groups by doing some Hispanic radio advertising for specifically in fire for some of our positions. We've done career fairs. We've had translators on site, and we're going to diverse groups to recruit HBCUs. So we're trying to do what we can to increase the diversity of our workforce. When you look at department ethnicity, this chart, I have a much more detailed report that breaks down everything about every department, a lot more detail, age. And so Mary has that. We'll make sure we hand that out so you can have that more detailed report. But I just want to point out, police does a pretty good job of representing the community, very diverse command staff, Parks and Rec also very diverse groups. And again, this handout that we'll give after the presentation, you want to give it after, you want to give it now?
Go ahead and do it now.
We'll give it now. So you can look through this later, but this has much more detailed information for you. I want to go back to wait, go ahead, Joyner, yeah.
While we're on this slide,
I got one.
I know that in previous HR conversations, we've talked about a desire for folks to have, thank you, career progression information, and I don't know if you want to call it mentorship. I'm probably not using the right vocabulary, but does that include opportunities to move department to department, or is that primarily focused at rising within one department and having sort of one streamlined career with the city?
That's more focused within the department, not cross-training and going outside and working in different departments. We have something, it's more of a fellowship with UNCW that we're implementing actually this semester, where the student will get to go from planning, HR, to different departments and spend time in each one of those departments. And then last year, they'll spend with the department they're choosing. So we have developed something like that. But in terms of existing employees, there's not a program in place that allows them to, go from planning over to engineering.
And I do think it would be good to be able to capitalize on that, but I will tell you, I think we already do a fairly good process of robbing from one another.
Sure.
Folks go from department to department. Nicole, for example, went from planning over to strategic planning, and Craig came out of the planning department. So we know where folks are who are very talented, but we don't do as good a job as preparing them beyond that department. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Clayton, you were talking about your, basically, what sounds like an internship. right?
Yeah, fellowship program, yeah.
Fellowship program. Is that the graduate students or undergraduate?
It's with graduate students with
This is your
UNCW, MPA program. Yes, ma'am. This next chart looks at a generational workforce, and you can see that millennials make up the majority of our workforce now at 40%. And Generation Z is growing. Last year, I think when I presented this, they were at 8%, so they've grown now to 14%. And then the boomers are slowly retiring from the organization. Councilman Joyner asked a good question. He wanted to know how generationally we reflect the community that we serve. And so Mary's going to hand out another handout for you. Sorry,
today.
she's got a lot of stuff. So we were looking at census data, and the census does not break down age by generation cohort. They break it down in 10-year increments. So 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40. And so what we've done is we've given you in this handout, you'll see the census data. And so, for example, for looking at 20 to 29-year-olds, the city has 19.3%. 29-year-olds work for the city, whereas residents make up 20%. So we mirror the community with our 20 to 29 age group. We exceed the community in our 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and 50 to 59 age groups. So you can see kind of the makeup by age with the city and the county and the state. Yeah, we'll get there. Any questions? Okay. Again, you have a handout that has a lot more detail in terms of demographics. Feel free to take a look at that. And if you have any questions, feel free to email or give me a call. So now I'm going to turn to our turnover. And this is for the first half of the year through December. We ended December at 6.6% turnover. So if we stay on that trend, we'll end around 13%, which is less than last year. So this is a good news story. We're doing better in terms of our turnover. For comparison purposes, Councilman Joyner asked a good question. He wanted to know what we looked at the last 5 years, this same point in time. So if you turn the handout I just gave you over, you will see this is a 6-month snapshot, December for the last 5 years. And so in 2024, we were at 7.9%, 23 was 7.6, 22 was our highest at 9.3, and then 21 was at 6.2. So one of the good news trends here is this is the lowest turnover we've had at this point in time since 2022, or since 2021. All right. Going to move on to our uniform police and fire turnover. Fire trending on pace with last year's turnover. They're at 5.5. They should end around 11% if they stay on this trend. Police turnover is trending up. If it continues, they're actually going to end up around 14%, which would be the highest they've had since 2022. So that's something that we need to be mindful of. Looking at our turnover for Parks and Public Works, this is another good news story. Parks and Rec currently at 7.2% turnover rate. If they stay on this trend, they will end the year at around 14%. And last year, they were at almost 24%. So we're seeing good trend there. Same with Public Works, currently 9.8. If they stay on this trend, they're going to end the year around 20%, which in last year they were almost 30%. So this is good news. And I think this has to do with the investments that council has made in our workforce. These are some of our lower paid employees, and we've continued over the years to increase our minimum pay. You all also approved last year career progression in Public Works for our equipment operators. You increased the pay for our CDL drivers. All of these things have had a significant impact and allowed us to reduce our turnover and retain our employees. Next, I want to look at our current vacancy rates. Again, this is a snapshot in time, early January. This is fluid, but as of this point in time, our current vacancy rate stood at 8.8%, which represents 105 vacancies. Just 2 months ago, when I presented this to you guys, we were at 9.3% with 112 vacancies. So we've made some positive progress in terms of our vacancy rate. Public Works vacancy rate is down from 18.5% in November. Now they're down to 14. So we've hired 8 additional employees in Public Works. We've hired 4 additional employees in Parks, bringing their vacancy rate down to 8.6. It was at 11.4. Fire vacancy rate has increased slightly. They've gone from 2.1 to now 4.6. They've seen 6 additional vacancies. WPD has remained unchanged. And then one other department I want to point out is engineering. They have increased by 2 vacancies. We've lost 2 professional engineers to another local jurisdiction. And that is an area we're having trouble attracting and retaining. CFPUA.
I think it's also important to note that during good times, engineers will command more in the private market. And so you'll see folks go into the private market, although these 2 that we most recently lost went to CFPUA. But in better and worse times, they tend to come and spend time with us. So it'll be a cyclical type of thing.
Do we know what the basic difference is between pay and compensation between the 2?
Yes, sir. We've looked at it. CFPUA has actually, because of the competitiveness for professional engineers, they've removed their engineers from their pay scale. And so they're kind of on their separate thing. And so they were able to provide compensation that was more than what the city could afford.
Thank you.
So I'm going to look now specifically at our uniform and sworn vacancy rates. So currently we have 36 vacancies in fire. There are 27 individuals that just recently, I think Sunday, graduated the academy. And so those are going to fill in some of those vacancies. And so their true vacancy number is 9. And then police, they have 41 vacancies. They have 18 that are in BLET. And so those 18 are going to fill in some of those. And so their true vacancy number is 23 vacancies. Looking at public works vacancy rate, again, we've made some progress in here. Stormwater, for example, when I presented to you in November, they had 20 vacancies. We've hired 7 individuals in the last couple of months in stormwater, which has been a huge help. Again, that career progression that council approved has allowed us to attract people and pay them based on their skill level. And also want to point out RTS operators, we're doing a good job there. We only have 4 RTS operator vacancies. It has been historically as high as 10 to 12. So again, by increasing our pay, remaining competitive, we've been able to keep that down. Looking at parks, again, this is another good area. For example, last November, we had 10 vacancies in parks and landscape. We've had 3 hires, so now we're down to 7. So we're making progress in this area as well. Again, I put this in front of you every year to remind you, the public and employees, that council has continued to invest in our workforce year after year. The biggest investment, again, was in FY23. That's when we had our highest turnover, highest vacancy rates. Significant increases for employees, police and fire, 14% on average. Our entry-level police and firefighters got almost 20% increases that year. Hourly, 7.5, EMT members, 5. The last 2 years, council has allowed us to adjust our ranges to try to keep up with the market. We've increased our minimums, we've increased driver pay. So again, thank you to council for continuing to invest in our workforce. So even with the investments, our peers continue to invest just like we do. And unfortunately, it sounds like they've been investing a little more. And so you asked us last August to take a look at specifically police, fire, and public works positions with our benchmark cities in the surrounding community. I detailed these. I gave you the results of this study in detail back in November, but I'm going to just highlight a couple things and then we'll get into some of the recommendations.
As you finished all of the different departments and vacancy, what is the total number of slots in the city and the total number of vacancies across the board?
So the total number of positions is 1,174. That's the total number of positions. And I believe that number includes that FTEs, that might include part-time as well. I think that number includes part-times.
That includes part-time?
Yes.
Okay, and the percentage of vacancy throughout the city?
That's the 8.8% vacancy rate. So 108, that adding up. 105, sorry. Yes.
Does this entail a whole lot of overtime pay?
So because of the vacancies that you see in fire and police, again, there's a lot of people in BLET and training. That does equate to people having to pick up extra shifts and work more. So that does equate to increased amount of overtime.
Those 2 departments?
Those 2 departments, yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Again, we looked at our benchmark municipalities. We looked at 8 of the top 12 municipalities in North Carolina as good benchmarks. They're very similar to us, similar services. We're losing more employees to our local municipalities than we are to our statewide. So it was very important for us to include a plethora of our local benchmarks where we've lost employees over the years, including CFPUA. The analysis, again, to remind you what we did, we reviewed our municipalities' positions and associated pay ranges. We then compared our position descriptions to the data received to ensure it was accurate comparisons. We wanted to make sure that a planner 1 in Leland was the same as our planner 1 here at the city of Wilmington. We then calculated a median compensation for the minimum, midpoint, and maximum. And again, that median is the middle number. It's not the highest, it's not the lowest, it's the middle number. And at the last November meeting, we talked about our compensation philosophy. And our philosophy is to pay the benchmark median. We want to be right in the middle of our benchmarks, plus or minus 5%. So I'm going to go into just real quick detail again, the results of that study for you. You can see on the left, the COW men, our police officer starting pay today is $48,616. The benchmark median starting pay for officer is $51,628. So we're 6.2% off starting pay amongst our comparators. And you can see on average for all the ranks, we're 7.2% off. When you look at the midpoint, which is considered the market rate, we're doing a little better. On average, we're 3.4% off. And then the max, we're 2.7% off for all the ranks. The spread, again, the spread is the minimum, the distance from the minimum to the maximum of the range. And so our spread is 60%, or more of our benchmarks are around 55%. So what you're going to see is we're going to make a recommendation to shrink our spread, and that's going to bring us more in line with right in line with our benchmarks.
So, excuse me,
Yes, sir.
if we were to go to the 7.2%, the worst, I mean, the biggest number, that would bring us up to today.
That would just bring us up today. That's correct. Yes, sir. And where we are today.
And then next year, sitting at this table,
I will tell you that the county manager has been incredibly interested in this topic. And he knows that the minute we raise ours, he will have to raise his.
it's, never mind.
It will be a chasing your tail type of thing.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So looking at our fire ranks, so our firefighter pay today currently start out at $45,893. Our benchmark median is $47,915, so we're 4.4% off starting pay. For all the ranks on average, we're 8% off. You'll notice that the upper ranks are off more than the lower ranks. So that's something that we're going to need to adjust. And I'm going to take you back to 2023 when we made a large adjustment for our hourly folks at the bottom, our starting pay. We adjusted them like 20%. Our upper ranks got less. And so in order to get us back in line with the market, what we're going to recommend is actually give a little more to upper ranks. And that's going to do a couple things, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. So you asked us to look at an option for a mid-year adjustment for public safety, and that's what we've done here. What we're recommending is that we shift our ranges to align with the market medians for all ranks. We're going to adjust the spread of the ranges to get to better align with the market. And then we're going to adjust our employees to align within those new ranges. To do so, the total cost is $3.1 million. That's for a full year for next year. What that looks like for our employees. So our proposed ranges, again, this is going to mirror our benchmark medians for all ranks. So on this slide, you'll see our police officers. We're recommending we adjust them 6.2%, all officers at that rank. And the new officer pay is going to go from $48,000 to almost $52,000, right in line with our benchmarks. You'll notice that the upper ranks, corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, they're getting more of an increase. Again, that's to fix some of the compression that we've experienced over the years by continuing to raise the bottom ranks, but not raising the upper ranks in equal amounts. By adjusting the upper ranks by these amounts, that's going to also allow us to ensure that when we promote people from one rank to the next, we can give them a guaranteed minimum promotional rate, 5% or 10%, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. You'll notice on the right, the new spread, you can see for the lower ranks, we've adjusted that spread from 60 to 55. The far right will show you how far off we are with our benchmark median. And so we're right in line. You'll notice there's a big jump, 11% from lieutenant. The reason there's that big jump, that is where we go from hourly to exempt salaried. And so those employees that go from sergeant to lieutenant, they lose that overtime. And so that increase is to make up for that lost overtime. When you look at fire, okay, we're going to adjust our firefighter starting pay by 4.4%, all our employees by 4.4%, and the new firefighter starting pay is going to be $47,902. And you can see, just like police, we're going to adjust our upper ranks more to bring them in line with the market, and also to create some space so that when we promote individuals, we don't run into leapfrogging or compression. Are there any questions from council about the proposed ranges? Oh, yes, Councilman Joyner.
Kevin, if you want to
Go first, Kevin.
Go ahead, David. I'll go after you. That's fine.
So part of this is that we're adding a rank to both departments, correct?
No, sir. So you asked about the trainee. We have a trainee rank today, and all of our trainees start 5% less than the starting pay. So while they're going through the academy and BLET, they're at a trainee rate, and then once they graduate, they get a 5% bump into the police officer and firefighter rank
Okay, so that just was not included in the
in the study. In the
graphs that we have currently, but you did include it in the proposal. Thank you.
That's correct. Yes, sir. Councilman Spears.
So I would say that I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. But you weren't the HR director at the time. Mr. Al Ragland was when we started to adjust pay rates at the bottom of the organization. And I said that it would only be fair when you made those adjustments that you would have to make the adjustments throughout the organization so people don't feel like they don't feel some type of angst because others are getting increases. And so here we are now discovering or looking to make these adjustments. And we could have done this years ago. And also, I think this gets lost in the conversation because I don't hear it much. Or maybe I've just tuned it out, but I don't think that I hear it much. When we hear these complaints or discussions about pay increases, that the pay for our employees has consistently increased over the past 4 or 5 years. And I don't want our employees to overlook that. So I don't, because I feel like I get the impression that the employees feel like we're not doing enough or we're undervaluing the work that they do. And so, I mean, I think it would go a long way to say, hey, listen, we understand the market changes or things change, but the leadership of this organization has consistently tried to increase our pay. I think that's the nicest way I can say it.
I appreciate you saying that because the council and the city leadership, especially an HR team, we do care about this and we want to make sure our employees are paid a fair wage. And we look at it every year, and council has every year. Whenever we've asked for an increase, you've made the tough choice and done that. So I appreciate those comments. Thank you. So another thing you wanted us to come back from November was talk more about step plans. And so Mary has a final handout for you that she's going to get through. But while she's handing that out, you can see we benchmarked our peers and we said, how many of you have step plans? There was very few. There were 4 of our large cities that have step plans: Asheville, Durham, Fayetteville, and Greensboro. The majority of our peers are not on step plan. They're what's called open ranges, which is what we're on today. And employees move through the ranges based on merit increases and market adjustments. We spent time the last 2 months talking with Asheville, Durham, and Fayetteville to understand their step plans, what it was like to implement them, what challenges they face, what did they like about them. And so what you see on the screen are some pros and cons that we got from our conversations with those municipalities. They all said it was very predictable, very transparent for employees. They know that if I'm promoted to this rank, this is where I'm going to go. Next year, this is what my pay is going to be. It's very consistent. You treat every employee the same. There's no room for differentiation based on performance. Some said that it has led to some retention because, again, employees know how much they're going to get each year, pending approved funding from council. That's the key fact point there. Some of the cons that we talked about, Mary's going to get into these here in a moment. Limited ability to recognize performance, again, because everyone has to be on a step. You can't be off the step. Everyone's on a step. It's a potential for plateauing. What that means is you progress through the steps. Once you get to the last step, that's it. Potential for leapfrogging and promotions. Mary's going to explain all these terms and stuff for you in a moment. Initial pay adjustments implementation, and it's very costly to maintain because if you make a market adjustment to your steps, let's say we adjust our steps all by 3%, not only are you budgeting for that 3% market adjustment, but you also have to budget for that 5% step increase for the employees. So it's very costly to maintain. Because some of these cons, the city of Asheville is actually moving away from their step plan next year for police. Durham seems to be happy with their step plan. And I think Fayetteville has some challenges. But I'm going to turn it over to Mary. In your packet, you have an example of a step plan here on the screen. This is, I'm not going to hide it, it's from the city of Asheville. This is their police step plan, but Mary has one that she's going to walk you through when she was at the city of Raleigh. And I'm going to turn it over to her, and I'm going to put it back on the definition slide so we can kind of level set with you all.
Leave me the easy topic. Good morning. At our last work session, one of the things we talked about was bringing back an example of a STEP program to make it easier to understand. So I figured I would go in reality. So what you have in front of you is actually from 2018, when the city of Raleigh implemented their STEP plan. They went through a huge compensation study in 2017, and this was the result where they implemented their STEP plan. I do want to note, just further caveat, that if you look in their budget book in 2020, by that point, we had dissolved the STEP plan. So it existed in the city of Raleigh for about 3 years, but it cost us over $30 million in those 3 years to maintain and fix all the things that came with it. So that's just the caveat I'll put out there as someone who lived and breathed it.
Well, can I ask?
Yeah.
Why did they go to all that trouble and put it in and it went away?
Because there's a desire, much to the point of predictability, and on paper, they look really good. And from an employee standpoint, it's desired. But by the time we left and moved out of it, most employees were ready because it does limit us in our ability to do promotions and some of those other pieces. And I'll walk you through why. But on paper, they're very attractive because it is very regimented in terms of, if you look at what's in front of you at the city of Raleigh, that step by step. But I do want to walk you through a couple of things. What a step plan is, it is a structured pay system. It outlines how an employee progresses, and it's based on predetermined criteria such as tenure, performance, or qualification. So if you look at, for example, the city of Raleigh, an employee has the ability to move through steps 1 all the way up through step 14, depending on their classification. Between each of those steps is a percentage. So that's how much, if in Raleigh, for example, if you were below midpoint, you would move 5% between the steps. If you were above the midpoint, you would move 3%. So it depended. You always had to be on a step. So that's why there is some complication here. So if you want to tweak an employee's salary or you want to do something different, you have to put an employee on a step. So that is one of the barriers to this. In terms of implementation, our consultant did it because it is very timely, because you have to determine how you're placing people on these steps. So for example, Chad and I start the academy together. We would make horrible recruits, but we started together. Chad, when we went to implement, is on, for example, we're both police officers. Chad gets placed on step 8 and I get placed on step 5. And you may wonder, how does that work if we both graduated from the same academy, right? Well, part of it is you have to go and research what our merit increases and what salary changes we've had in the 10 years we've been with the city. So 1 year, for example, I was a horrible employee, so I didn't get any merit. Chad was exceptional and he did. So even in the implementation of it, there's a lot of research and record keeping that you have to understand in order to place employees. And I'll tell you, after you implement a step, you spend the first year trying to clean a lot of that up. So that's one piece of it. It's also in terms of, I want to walk through the next one, couple of definitions. So time, I talked about this a lot and we wanted to make sure everyone understood it. We talk about time and position. So this is about the duration an employee has spent in their current role, not about how long they've been with the city, but in their current role. So how long has
Their current step,
or no, just their current role.
because time and grade,
Well, we'll get into that, but this is really about how long has someone been a police officer?
I see.
How long has someone been a captain? That's time and position. Time of service is how long you've been with the city. So that's the length of you worked for that specific organization. And those two will vary. typically, because you are promoted or moved around. And so when you talk about a step system, that's some of the decision you have to make. Is as an organization, are you valuing time and position? Or are you valuing time of service? Because the reality is in a step system, they conflict. And I'm about to walk you through how that works. Because we have what's called leapfrogging. And that occurs when an employee's salary progression skips over another employee. So I jump over someone else who has similar experience or qualifications. So I'm going to give you a specific example. So let's take a police detective who is on step 10. I feel like I should be a little teacher, but if we go to step 10 for a police detective, and he is promoted to a police sergeant, he has 18.75 years of service with the city. So if you look at that, so he's on step 10 as a detective. So he's making right now 74. When we promote him based on our guidelines, we have to move that person to a step 11. So that would put them at 82,000. All right. Now we have already, in terms of police sergeants, because of the way that they were slotted or other pieces, I already have police sergeants who have over 18 years of service who are sitting on steps 8, 9, 10, and 11. So when that person was promoted, they did what we call leapfrogging, where they jumped over those other employees based on time of service. And that's just based on years in organization.
Barry,
Yes, sir.
why do you have to, if you're a police detective, step 10, and you're getting promoted to police sergeant, why would you then go to police sergeant, step 11? Why not like police sergeant, step 9?
I mean, you could, but usually it's a 5 or 10%. It depends on your promotional, because in order to be promoted, you do want some sort of incentive in terms of increase in salary,
It is an increase.
but it's a very minor one. It's
Yeah.
about a $1,000 difference. And usually, depending on the promotion, I can go back and look at what they were in Raleigh at the time. But based on, I think it was a 5 or 10% increase, that would have been where they jumped to.
It mitigates the leapfrog issue.
It does, but it also,
Incentive to increase the pay.
but there's also for some, there's not an increase then to be promoted with additional responsibility if you're not paying for it.
Well, if you went from a 10 as a police detective to a 10 as a sergeant, a $6,000 increase.
There is, and that could be part of it. And so there are slight ways to mitigate it, but I was just giving an example. So some of that is going to depend on your promotional guidelines.
We talked to Durham, who again, they were satisfied with their STEP program. They do spend every year time and have a budget for this fixing issues like leapfrogging. Because it's just basing, how quick someone might promote real quick. And then someone might wait a long time to promote. And then so depending on where they're at, it's going to, put them in different parts of that step potentially.
So I want to do one more example because that was time of service. So that's how long you've been in an organization. The leapfrogging that we struggle with the most is what we call time and position. And so an example I'll give you is I have a senior firefighter. So if you go to the bottom of the chart, senior firefighter, second grade, who's on step 8. And they have been with the organization for a little while, right? And they are promoted to a fire lieutenant. And so if they're on an 8 as a senior firefighter at 60, and we promote them, we're going to move them to a 7. So that's a $5,000 increase. And that's based on the policy, right? If I have fire lieutenants who were promoted quicker, which happens, right? They spend less time in the steps. I have leapfrogged those people who have been lieutenants longer. Does that make sense? Meaning they may have less time of service, but they've been lieutenants in the organization longer. And so that's what we mean by time and position. And I will tell you that gets very costly to fix because what you'll have is these long tenured employees who wait till later to be promoted and they're automatically in order to pay are going to jump over newer employees that maybe were promoted quicker, right? So this is complicated. Y'all don't need to understand it all, but I wanted to show you some of the real life examples that go with this in terms of that. Another thing Clayton mentioned is what we call plateauing. And that's where you reach the end in terms of the step and you max out. We run into that with ranges as well. You know, one of the ways that, for example, Charlotte, I don't like to compare anybody to Charlotte, but Charlotte fixed this, and they're another one that has a successful step program, is because they have shrunk their steps to about 6 steps per each category. Because they have created what they call discrete. And what that means is there's no overlap in numbers. But what that also means is if you're a firefighter, you're going to max out within 6 years in terms of your earning potential.
Unless you get promoted.
Unless you get promoted. But not everyone wants to be promoted or can be promoted. But so that's the other option, is to also shrink them, but you've also taken away that earning potential long term. And so there's a host of things that go with this. Now, the one thing I do want to point out, and you can even see it at the top of Raleigh's, and we used to produce this every year with the budget, and Clayton said it earlier. While there is predictability with a STEP program, they are all based on performance as well. If you perform unsatisfactory or are on probation or those kinds of things, you're not eligible for a step increase. If regular employees do not receive merit and it is not approved, meaning, you know, those lean years where sometimes that occurred, the employees in a STEP program do not move either, because it is not a guarantee. It is also based on salary and movements as well, because it is all based on budget decisions. And so while this looks like it is a contract, it's also based on the choices that we as an organization and council makes during the budget process. So that's another important thing, I think, to understand. There's no
That's for the
guarantee.
step program.
It's with any compensation, honestly.
Right,
Yeah,
understand.
yes, sir.
A question, just curious, is that when you were looking at the senior firefighter, step 8,
Yeah.
and he was promoted and he reverted back
To
to
a
a step
7.
7, whereas with the police, it went
It's
forward.
promotional guidelines, or I'd have to go back and look at what the promotional guidelines were in Raleigh at the time, depending on whether it's 5 or 10%.
Okay.
Because that's what some of this is going to dictate, yeah. But the key is that like Clayton said, even those that still have them, you're struggling to combat and implement this. And when you think you have fixed one problem, so for example, in Raleigh, we thought one year we fixed it, and the next year then we're battling leapfrogging for time in position. And so it's a struggle, and there's no flexibility in there in order to do slight increases or mid-years or those kinds of adjustments, because you're tied to a specific step. And so I think there's other ways as an organization that we can become more transparent. So one of the things in Raleigh when we dissolved this was we redid our promotional policies so that they were more clear and consistent for employees to understand. And so I don't know if there's any questions. Did I cover everything you needed me to cover?
I think you did, yes.
I know there was a lot, and I didn't want to get too bogged in the details, but it's like playing Tetris with little squares. So, but glad to answer any questions that you have.
We do need to understand it.
Yes, you do. And it's because it keeps coming up in conversation, and it's something that, again, I have done the implementation of, and I've also done the backside where we have had to dissolve it. And neither one was fun.
You mentioned that, I believe you said that Asheville was moving away from the step plan.
They were,
Yes,
yes, sir.
As was Fayetteville.
No, not Fayetteville.
Because you mentioned
Asheville.
2. I thought you said there were 2 that were, Raleigh went away with it.
Raleigh went away with it as
Okay.
well.
So Durham, the rest of those 4, I mean, are these step plans, is there one size fits all? Or-
No, in fact, Greensboro, for example, I could talk about theirs briefly too.
Yeah.
Theirs isn't actually a true step plan. It's a partial step plan.
Yeah.
So if you look at theirs, it's a hybrid function as well. So that's why some of these, it's not as easy as others. They've morphed them into hybrid. So it's not necessarily.
You're not locked in on any one particular style. You can. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me summarize by saying staff will do whatever you want to do. That's what's the first thing. Second thing is, we just believe that with the step plans, you do away with flexibility. You give up a bit of flexibility in going to the step plan, and you potentially increase the amount of money that has to be allocated for promotional or merit purposes. because there's just not that flexibility. That's mainly the big issue or the big difference between the two. What do you get with it? You get the predictability, but you don't get the flexibility of rewarding performance as much. And when you get ready to allocate funding, it'll have to be probably in larger amounts.
Well, the predictability is for the employee. The flexibility is for this body. I mean, knowing that you've got to fund it each year, that's where that falls on this body. But the predictability is certainly works in favor of the employees.
Sure.
Is that a fair statement?
I think that's true.
Okay.
And one of the things that I'll get to in just a second is talking about promotional pay and how we can bring some form of predictability back to that.
So one of the pieces of feedback that I've gotten is that there are people who choose not to seek promotion because the compensation on the other side of that promotion does not warrant the added responsibilities. I expect that there would be somewhere where we could sort of nail that down to a meaningful data point of like, what is that number to get people interested in that promotion in a meaningful, sincere, good faith way? Have we done that for us, or do we know how to pull that lever to find that out?
I think what it gets back to, there's a couple things. One is our ranges aren't competitive. So if you're a fire engineer today and you're going to go to a lieutenant or captain with supervisory responsibilities, you expect to be compensated as such. Our pay at the upper ranks have not kept up with our peers. So I believe that by adjusting our ranges to be in line with the benchmark median, that is going to increase the pay for those ranks, and people will have more of an incentive to then want to promote. The second piece to that is they want to know, how much am I going to get my promote? Is it worth my time? So if we are able to make these adjustments to our ranges, we will be able to get back to a plan where we can give at least a minimum 5% for our hourly ranks. When you go from hourly to exempt, you get 10%. That's a minimum. It could be more than that, depending on internal equity. For example, some promotions we did recently in fire, they all got a minimum of 5. Some of them got more than that because there was room, and we looked at internal equity and gave them more, some 7, 8% increases.
Was there transparency in why they got, who got what?
So
Do they understand why, are they being told by the supervisor and decision maker, hey, this is why, you allocated 5%, 10%, but we bumped it to 12%, and this is why?
So my staff does communicate with the department head. So Chief Williams, Chief Mason, and when we make these promotions and run past them and answer any questions they have so that they can understand them. When we make the offer to the employee, we do explain our process. And I've got a slide, I'll go ahead and jump to that slide real quick, and how HR evaluates internal equity. There's a science to compensation. So what we do is we calculate their years of service and time and grade. So how long they've been in the city, how long have they been in the current position? Then we're going to calculate their years of relevant experience, because in police, we have police officers that can do lateral entry, meaning they can come in higher than a starting officer depending on their experience. And so we got to take into account their experience with the city, as well as their experience outside the city. Another unique factor with Wilmington is that we provide our employees with an incentive for education. So they get a bachelor's $1,000, a bachelor's $2,000, associate's $1,000. If you were hired prior to 2018, that money is in your base pay. If you're hired after 18, it's add pay. So what we have to do is we have to subtract out that additional pay for the degree to put everyone on a level playing field. And then we look at where, if we're promoting them, we want to give them at least 5%, 10% based on where they're promoting. And then we look at, all right, we're going to place this employee in the grade with like peers. And our goal is to avoid compression and what Mary talked about, leapfrogging. We don't want to have someone with similar experience being promoted, jumping those individuals. So that is how we determine pay within our compensation. And as Mary mentioned, there is a degree of flexibility, again, because with a step, you're going to move, if it's our policy, to 5%, you're going to be stuck at that 5%, where today there's some flexibility for us to say, yes, we can move 5%, but he or she needs to be higher in the range to be equivalent to their peers. So we're going to give them 2 or 3% more.
I have a question going back to the handout that you had. if somebody makes a lateral transfer from another agency, let's say that their spouse relocates to the area of their trailing spouse and they want to come and work for our police department, how are they charted?
It depends on the policy. So for example, I forget exactly, but it was based on years of experience and something about time and where they would place on the initial, whether they were put as a senior or a regular. I think at one point fire in Raleigh, and I'm looking at fire because they may know this, they didn't accept laterals in at higher than firefighter, if I'm not mistaken. They might have changed that policy. Is it still the same? So you couldn't go from another organization to a battalion chief in Raleigh. Like they went through, am I saying that right? But the police department did, they accepted laterals and they had a specific policy about how they were put into the system.
Clear as mud.
Well, let us help you a bit.
So again, this is our promotional pay, how we do it, and what, if we're able to make the adjustments, like I mentioned, to our ranges and get them competitive and move our upper ranks more, we can get back to more of a guarantee and brings some level of more transparency and predictability to the promotional process for candidates. One hybrid option that for council to consider, instead of a step program, is to create a career ladder for those entry-level police officer and firefighters. And so this is slide 27, I believe. Is that correct, Laura? Yes. Yeah. So how this would work is we would insert a senior police officer and senior firefighter position. So if you're a new trainee, you're going to come at the trainee rate. Once you graduate VLET, you're going to get a 5% increase to the sworn or uniform position. After you complete 3 years of service with the organization, you get an automatic 3% bump to a senior police officer, meaning you're fully competent, you can function fully as a firefighter police officer. So that would give our entry-level ops, because that's where we're concerned about losing individuals, is that 1 to 5 year. And that's where we've invested a lot of time and resources in them. And so by giving them a clear path and predictability, 6 months, 5%, 3 years, 3%, we're able to retain them. And that's what we've seen some of our benchmark and our peers implement, is something similar to this.
We actually considered this in this year's budget. We could not accomplish it because of the compression issues that existed above. So we ditched the idea in this year's budget as a result of that. Now that we've entered into this conversation about compensation mid-year and then into next year, we would be able to adjust appropriately.
If we were to implement something like this next year, how it would work, we'd adjust our ranges of our employees to match the market. Then everybody who has at least 3 years of experience or more, they're going to get a 3% increase on top of that. So that we can then squeeze in that senior police officer and firefighter rank. So the cost to do that in the budget will be $900,000. In addition to the market adjustments that I talked about earlier.
Is that contemplated in the 4.7 number that's at the bottom of this? Sorry to
interrupt. It is not. It's so this is this 900,000 addition to the wait. That's an addition.
He's at the end. He's at the number.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
He's at the number, but that's
4.7.
4.7 is the next year, isn't that the?
That's next year, and that does not include that.
So it'd be 5.7, 5.6.
Yes. If you were to do the senior as well.
I like the new spelling for promotional.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. Some of my staff caught that afterwards.
Make sure people are paying attention.
I appreciate that. It's really reasonable. And I'll bring this all together here in a moment. I'm going to cover all the compensation. We'll come back at the end. We can have a conversation about all this. The other thing you asked us about was the cancer benefit program. And we covered this at the last council meeting. There is a current benefit program. It's going to be permanently funded, and it is permanently funded by the state. There's no additional cost to the city. Beginning July 1st of this year, there's going to be additional funding going to this program. And it basically includes all active firefighters and any retirees to the last 10 years or less. It gives them a lump sum payment of $37,000 per diagnosis, and that is to help them cover expenses that insurance isn't going to cover. There's a lifetime max benefit of $74,000. And again, it only covers cancer illnesses diagnosed on or after January 1st of 2022.
Why is that?
That's just when the program was first implemented. And so they had to start at some point in time. So I'm going to move now into general employee compensation. Slide 31, remind you about the results that we did for our public safety, our public works employees, grounds technicians and parks. The starting pay for them is almost 10% off our benchmark median. And almost all of our employees in parks do start at that minimum rate. And so what we're recommending in terms of next year's budget is to move them up a grade. And so that will basically take the minimum from currently $34,000 up to $36,000 a year, bring us more in line with our benchmarks. My staff looked at a cross section of the organization. We didn't look at every exempt position, but we did look at a number of exempt positions across the organization to each grade. And you can see in total at the bottom, we are off by 5% for our exempt positions from the minimum. From the midpoint of market rate, our exempt positions are off by 4%. When you look at our hourly positions on the next slide, you'll see that we're off by 7% and our market rate is off by 6%. I have highlighted up here 3 positions. Our philosophy is if your position is more than 10% below the market rate, and even if we do make market adjustments, you're still 10% below the market rate, that's telling us that you're not at the right grade. So we need to reclassify that position to a higher classification. And so that's what we're going to be having conversations with over the next couple of months through the budget process, is reclassifying our grounds techs, our tree trimmers, and our paralegals. So if council were to consider a mid-year adjustment like they are for public safety employees, this is what we would recommend, staff would recommend for general employees. Again, we're going to reclassify our grounds techs, turf grass workers, and RTS workers to better align with the market. That cost will be $92,000. And then to adjust all hourly and exempt ranges, we believe adjusting it by 3% to keep us in line with the market, that would cost $1.5 million. Yes, ma'am.
What about some of these other hourly positions that seem to have a big difference, like administrative support staff, recreation coordinator, et cetera?
Sure. So if we were to adjust our midpoint ranges by 3%, that'll get it under that 10% threshold. It'll help fix that. It's still going to be off, but it will be under that 10% threshold that we have. So this is kind of the summary slide of mid-year adjustment options for council. Police and fire is 3.1 million. Grounds techs, turf grass workers, RTS workers, 92,000. That would impact about 38 positions. All other employees, again, across the board, 3% adjustment to our ranges and employees, 1.5 million. So the total cost would be $4.7 million that you would commit to next year's budget. The half-year cost of that would be 2.35 million, the remainder of this fiscal year.
Let's talk just briefly about mechanics if you decide to do this. If you decide to do this, half of this amount, 2.3 million, would be removed from the fund balance to pay for this for the remainder of the fiscal year. The whole amount, the 4.7 million, would have to be included as an increase in next year's budget, because you don't have a revenue source for all of that money right now. Your 2.35 that you're using out of fund balance is one time. So you would be talking about almost a $5 million gap, if you will, that will have to be funded in next year's budget. Right now, we anticipate that revenue will grow by what in the general fund?
We have a surplus of 1.8 to 5.6 range, and everything's really unknown at this point.
1.8 to 5.6.
And that is with departments being restricted to this year's allocation in next year's budget.
I'm sorry, everything's what at this point? I misheard what she said.
So because we don't have a lot of our revenue in right now, we had to do a range of things by guesstimates, but the closest one is 1.8 based on what we have. The estimate of the highest part could be up to 5.6 million.
Thank you.
That's best case. scenario.
Yeah, that's best case.
So just understand that this almost $5 million has to be included in next year's budget. It's not like we've already allocated half of it and we only got to allocate the second half next year. We got to allocate the whole thing next year.
Yes, sir.
Just double click on that a little bit, because this is, I guess, my fourth budget workshop season. And I don't think a budget workshop, like, in my opinion, it shouldn't just be, here's the number, here's the cost. Council, do you want to increase it in the budget next year? That's your option. I'd like us to have a real workshop where we're really throwing some ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks, some of them uncomfortable. For instance, you know, I think increasing the pay that's shown for police and fire, and a lot of the grounds workers and folks that are doing boots on the ground jobs, is something that's a priority for this council. I don't think that we've heard anything different yet, but I think there's a couple ways that we could get around to it. Maybe we just say, hey, rather than just expanding the budget by, $6 million. But if we were to say around this table here today, we said, all right, if you're one of the departments contemplated in this, department heads, you need to go cut your budget, your operating budget by 20% and bring it back to us. You bring us what we can do. We think we need to pay your people more. That's important for the future of this organization, but you need to go cut your budget by 20% and bring it back to the next budget. Let's take a look at it and talk about it there. That's a real budget workshop to me. Not, oh, it's going to cost $6 million. Do you want to fund it or not?
That is not the intention of my discussion at this point in time. We will discuss at the end of the workshop today what your intentions are going forward. I can deliver you a budget that's balanced at any tax rate, period. I can do that.
You have to.
The question is, at any tax rate though,
I understand. You still have to.
my question will be, do you have the appetite? And if so, what services would you be willing to adjust?
Well, I don't think that needs to be a conversation that's coming just from us. That's why I think if we gave a directive, we'd like to do this. We understand it's fiscally constraining the budgets that we have without increasing it. We want to do it without increasing this budget by $6 million as an exercise. Bring us back, department heads, bring us back budgets that are X amount that are going to cover the majority of this for your department. Is that something you think that we could see by the next budget workshop?
I doubt we could see it by the next budget workshop. I suspect we could see it in the workshops that occur and potentially by the manager's proposed budget and the workshops that occur afterwards. You remember you're working on 30 days? 30, 45 days, and of that, 10 days is going to be turnaround time. So the answer to your question is no. But if you have that kind of attitude coming out of this workshop today, tell us that, because we've already told the department heads, don't come forward with anything new unless you can replace some service in your budget to accomplish this new initiative. So the number stays the same. If you tell us that you want to see a budget that includes those salary increases in that cap, we certainly will do that. And we will do as much magic with the numbers as we can. But there may be service reductions that have to be considered, and those would be put on the table from the staff perspective. And then, of course, you have your own internal or individual biases, which you should also relate to us.
That's a workshop to me. That's us really kind of getting into the meat and potatoes. I mean, we know what it's going to cost. Now we need to see what we can, how we get there without it just being, like, all right, well, we're just gonna increase the budget by $5.5 million.
And I did not mean to indicate you were going to increase the budget by $5 million. I was just trying to outline for you the fact that we've already put a limitation on the staff, on the staff with regard to their increase, their submissions. And this is going to cost an additional $5 million. If you tell us that $5 million needs to be in that cap, we'll come back to you with that. Believe me.
I think playing what if is healthy. You know, if we did this, how's that gonna affect this? What if we do that? How's that gonna, I just think that's what this should be all about.
And I agree. We just need to make sure that we're doing what if with those things that are not, if you will, sacred cows for y'all. We don't want to take away health insurance for the employees, right? Or something like that. But if we want to delay this expenditure, use more money from here, substitute this service for another service, those kinds of things, we certainly will be glad to give you those alternatives. Absolutely. But the more direction you can provide to us about what is on the table for you and what is off the table, then we save a whole lot of dancing in the dark, trying to figure out what's going on.
You said to your staff that each department is to kind of like stay within what they spent last year.
This year. Yes,
This
sir.
year, right.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think one thing that I'm really concerned about is making sure that we don't lose services.
And we will do our best. We will postpone expenditures. We will increase revenues. We will offer a service for another service. We will do our best, but I cannot guarantee,
Right.
especially if this council tells us that you're willing to consider service reductions, and especially in certain areas, then we certainly will do that. But I can't guarantee at this point in time that the proposed budget won't come forward with a service reduction.
Tony, we've talked about this in our meetings one-on-one, but maybe this is a good time to bring it up to the group. I really think that our first budget session in November needs to be about these discussions. It really needs to be, whether it's, I've seen, putting the different colored dots on the whiteboard, or, putting poker chips in a fishbowl. I mean, I think it really needs to be that we all as a group, really tell what our weighted values are, and, what we're willing to cut and what we're absolutely not willing to cut. And I think that's how we need to really start out next year. So I'm just putting that out there for the group.
Tony,
Yes, sir.
so I wanna agree with Mayor Pro Tem. I don't think we need to be, I'm not on board with cuts at all, cutting services. What we need to do is look at how thoroughly we're doing our jobs, how thoroughly departments are doing their jobs. And does it warrant, I understand what's going on in the market, what's going on around us. But just to come and look at someone who can get anybody that gets the attention of any one of these council members and says, you know what, we need more money because this is what's going on in another organization, or this is what's going on across the Cape Fear River or next door. But, how efficient are we at doing our jobs? Because that matters. You can't just ask for a pay raise just because. And that may be a part of the conversation that no one really wants to hear, but let's just be honest here. You're right. This is a budget work session, so let's do work. But we're not going to dig a hole for ourselves so people can make more money so we can cut services to the citizens. Because we don't look efficient doing that at all. So someone else can just poke their chest out. Because as I stated earlier, we have diligently worked to increase the salaries of people within this organization. And we want to improve. But again, let's ask the citizens, how can we improve? How do you want to see us get better? And let's ask our employees, how do you want us to get better? How do you want these pay increases to happen? Are you willing to pay more to get more? But we're not going to rob the citizens just to say that, oh, we've caught up with Asheville or High Point or whoever we're trying to keep up with. We're not going to do that. I'm not going to be on board with that.
What's the growth rate of the tax base? We've been growing about 1.2, 1.5% a year.
Are you talking about property tax?
I mean, that's primarily what we're getting majority of our revenue. So I want to be cognizant of the fact is that we're trying to accomplish something to raise the compensation, take care of CIP, take care of the issues that we have as a community, as a growing community, understand that we're also geographically locked in now because of the elimination of annexation in 2010. And, you know, with River Lights coming to its ultimate end, the opportunity for the tax base growth is not what it used to be. And to take into consideration the sales tax revenue that we collect, we're getting hammered at county gets 80%, we're getting about 20 on the dollar based on the ad valorem tax base or based on the population. They have a decision that they're going to use on ad valorem, which gets them more money than us. So I have to take that into consideration as how much of that tax base is growing per year. And then the needs of this organization, the city, the employees that are here that we value, taking into consideration, there's a lot of needs in regards to maintenance of people that are using our services and our facilities every single day. They may not even live here. So and then the other part of this, Tony, is, you know, on this compensation, we did a 5% raise last year, did we not? And I know that there was a flashpoint when Leland raised their rate for police officers to what, 60,000, I believe, I don't know, something like that. Also understanding that those are smaller communities with smaller departments that are going to probably raise. This has been going on since I've been here. Police officer, fire official to Wrightsville Beach, to Leland, wherever, I understand. But we've also made adjustments in pay, you know, kind of in not all at one time sometimes, but we've done it over a period of 2-3 years.
Yes, sir.
I know that we had a pay adjustment many years ago where we had some compression issues and we made the adjustments over a period of time in smaller bites.
Yes, sir.
And sometimes people have just got to understand, hey, you know, we're not going to be able to take this all at one time and also provide the services that citizens do expect. That's what I kind of want to look at. And then the other thing is challenging the employment base here is, can they look within their departments to even cut a percentage, 5%, 4%, the more. Something along those lines, you know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Where we can look to see, can we do things more efficiently, understanding everybody's going to get a pay increase here. What can they do within their department? I mean, it's kind of, you know, using a litany of different things to make the adjustment, but not do it all in one lump sum. I know maybe some of these folks here may not want to hear that, but I have a responsibility to fiduciary reliance to these people out here that are saying, you know, we're going to have a property reevaluation. That's not guaranteed will be pretty significant this year. And I think some people are going to be shocked with some of the prices there. We're going to have to make an adjustment to our tax rate to hopefully go revenue neutral. So we've got some things to work with. That's the challenge I would kind of think. It's kind of a litany of different things. Understand we want to protect the service delivery. Understanding what can we do within our own departments to see if we can cut a little bit there. Can we make the investments gradually as opposed to all of one stop? So.
And those are all options. I think the difficulty for council is going from November, when you're talking about your strategic plan and your big picture and your vision for the community, to May, when you're talking about the tax rate.
Yeah.
You're going from looking here to looking here. And that's the adjustment that we're trying to help you get to. We're certainly not trying to box you in. We're trying to help you get there. And if it means challenging for half or all of this revenue to come out of the departments, if it means staging that, remember that you get further behind every time. So, but if it means staging it, then that's what we need to do. You are, as the mayor said, the fiduciary responsible for the taxpayers' money. We understand that. We're just trying to reconcile what you want your community to be and what you can afford for your community to be. So at the end of this, I ask you to give this some thought, but if, and again, we don't want to bring forward a budget that eliminates a service or a group of services where one council member or three council members feels as though they're being picked on. We would love to have your collective guidance with regard to that, because when we go back into this budget and we come back forward with it, we need to know what you're looking for up front as opposed to trying to guess.
Ms. Martell has made a comment that you didn't have all of the numbers necessary to make the decision. Kind of guess.
With revenue, that's correct.
I mean, from my perspective, I would rather wait to make this decision as opposed to midpoint, at least my perspective. I'm one of 7 here. In this year's budget, mid-season adjustment. Because you don't have all this.
I don't, and just for timeline, we will get our first estimate from New Hanover County February 15th, kind of mid, but then we get one every month, which changes slightly. We should have at least 6 months of sales tax by February as well, which helps us.
Gives you a better idea of the trend.
Yes.
Okay. So with the best case scenario, where do we stand? I mean, that
Somewhere between 1.8 million and $5 million.
understood that, but I mean, how does that affect what we're dealing with here today, the $65 million increase that's proposed, or not proposed, but marched out there?
If you decide to do something mid-year, the total year has to go into next year's budget.
Get that.
So if we do something that's 4.7%, we now have to make the budget 4.7% higher next year, which taps into the 1.8 and 5.6. And then the other consideration is this is just getting you to where you want to be right now. Everyone around us is looking at compensation for the next budget cycle as well. So you may have to then tap into another merit or some type of increase on the baseline that you just created, which will take more revenue because now you're compounding it with a new year.
Quick question, can we go to page 27? So at the bottom of that page, you got an asterisk, fiscal year 26 budget impact $900,000 to use this hybrid career ladder for police and fire. And so I mean, are we having that and saying it's 450,000 out of for this year?
That wasn't included in this year because it was recommended for next year implementation.
Still in the budget process for this. for
We
next
didn't,
year.
it's not in that recommendation for the mid-year. It would be a recommendation that you would tell us to do in the budget, in the future budget.
I see it takes 476. Yeah, I got you. I just didn't realize if, okay, I was hoping that that was an option to do this as the mid-year adjustment and then revisit doing the full scale.
The problem with doing this a little bit, is the compression issues. If one of the reasons we didn't implement it this year,
Yeah.
coming out of the budget process, was you need to fix the upper compression we have, and specifically at least fire, I know. And so if you don't do the mid-year adjustments, you're not fixing that. So to implement this is actually just making that compression worse, which is why we recommend doing it next year, once we've been able to fix some of that compression. I'm sorry, I was on a roll. But yeah, so that's one of the reasons it wasn't done on its own outside of that.
I appreciate that clarity, and I do find the career ladder sort of for those hourly employees to be an attractive option. I mean, I'm comparing it in my head to how we pay teachers. And teachers have a predictable ladder pay scale. I think that it's a fair way to pay that profession. I think that it's a predictable way. And I'm also thinking about the fact that with police and fire in particular, going through the academy, going through BLET, you have folks who are going through a program in some ways designed to weed out people who should not be in that profession or who are not really called to that profession anyhow. There's more to it than being plugged into a job for a dollar amount. And, you know, you're just gonna find yourself on this career ladder one day. So I like the hybrid option. I don't know, I feel like at our last meeting, we were all very excited about, well, not excited, but I don't know. I felt like we had consensus at our last meeting that we wanted to do a mid-year adjustment, at least for police and fire. And so I am interested in moving in that direction.
Any other discussion about salaries at this point?
What's our fund balance? What's the percentage?
Martha, you got that?
I know our goal is 20 plus 25, whatever.
Between
I
20 and
can
25.
get back to you. I'm looking to see what Jennifer presented at June 30.
Yeah, because if we did the mid-year, we're taking that out of fund balance at 2.3.
Correct.
It's 3.1, right? But it's mid-year adjustments, police and fire is 3.1.
That's the year.
2.35 for mid-year.
Full year.
Yeah, if you just did police and fire, maybe it would be 1.6 would come out of fund balance. If that was just police and
1.6.
fire, just police and fire.
You may just have to live with a small percentage fund balance.
All of them is the 4 point something number is to do all employees.
I mean, I know you probably won't do that, but I've seen it as low as 12, and I wouldn't recommend that. But
I've been around as good as those two.
I can live with 20.
I will tell you, we have no issue doing the mid-year adjustment if that's what council's direction is. I will say, and I'll tell this to all of the employees, I am the manager for all of the city, not just for public safety. And I am going to have to advocate to make sure we keep our our salary adjustments across the city appropriate. But if council feels that public safety is the most important thing at this point in time, we certainly can do just the 1.6 million.
To Councilman Jordan's point, that was kind of the driver of this entire conversation in our last budget session.
We specifically asked to have this conversation as a result of what I felt was a collective agreement.
It seems to have shifted and grown in scope, which happens. I understand that, but that was my intent in the original discussion and my understanding of the original discussion as well. I do think it's important to know what that does to the fund balance.
It'll be a negligible amount.
Negligible.
I'd still like to see it though, for the entire city. You know, I know that the police and the fire, they kind of, I won't say twisted our arm, but they had a really solid campaign, you know, make sure that we do that. And I think that is important. But then again, as you just mentioned, Tony, we represent this entire city. So depending on what the fund balance looks like, they help us to determine that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there was a consensus. We were forced to have this conversation. I think we would have come to it naturally on our own, as we have been for the 4 or 5 years that we've had this discussion. But our arm was twisted. We were forced to have this conversation. And so, no, we can't just do something for one part of this organization, because guess what? What if stormwater or what if trash? They say, well, you know what? Hell, we're going to design the same campaign. And so every morning, every week, we come outside now and we got trash cans overflowing or not being picked up. Then what? Or gyms and recreational services not taking place all throughout the city because they want to increase now too. Then what? I don't think we're looking at this the right way. I really don't. And I'll be honest, I don't care who gets upset about it anymore. This is crap. This is crap. If you're going to do something for this organization, you're going to do it for the entirety of this organization.
So Kevin, you're not for a mid year adjustment then?
I'm not for a mid-year adjustment for just police and fire. Sorry. If we're gonna do a mid-year adjustment, we're gonna do a mid-year adjustment for everybody. And then we'll all take the blame for what we have in the fund balance and what's not taking place within the city. And we can all point the fingers at each other.
Any other comments? Let us walk you through another element of compensation, which specifically relates to the benefits that we offer. We have been concerned about this for a while, knowing that a good deal of compensation that is paid through salaries goes to health insurance, dental insurance, those types of things. So we've been doing some work on that at the benefits committee level. We'd like to give you the results of that, and so you'd be able to see that.
Yes.
Great.
So this time last year, we presented the results of a comprehensive benefit study. We hired a consultant to go out, look at our benchmarks and look at our premium costs, our plan design, and see how competitive we were. At November's budget work session, if you recall, I had a chart that had police and fire compensation and also had the cost for health insurance. And if you remember back in November, our employees, amongst all of our benchmarks we use, pay the most for health insurance. And so one thing that staff has been working towards is what can we do to bring that cost down to make us more competitive. And so this chart up here just shows you from the result of the benefit study we did a year ago, the COW column that shows what our employees pay on a monthly basis. So for employee only, for the high deductible plan, they pay $145 a month. Our benchmarks are paying $68 a month. And so we're 53% off of our benchmarks. And you can see how it looks for all of the premiums, different tiers for the high deductible and the PPO.
Let me ask, to start with, how did we get that out of whack?
That's a good question.
There was a council subcommittee many years ago. You may recall that Kevin O'Grady actually oversaw that. We did a deep dive into it, and we did it based upon percentages of the overall premium that it was supposed to, that we were going to pay. At that point in time, we were in a good point. The problem is maintaining the percentage as the premiums went up, got us further and further out of whack.
So we didn't adjust.
We did not adjust the percentages. We just moved them with the numbers. And so that's the way that we got to where it is.
So this next chart here looks at our plan design for our benchmarks. And I just want to highlight here for you, if you look at the high deductible plan on the left, the deductible, again, that's the amount the employee is responsible to pay for until tow insurance kicks in. So our employees for an individual plan, they pay a $2,000 deductible on a high deductible plan. Our benchmarks are $2,300. Families $4,000. Our benchmarks are $46. So same with out of pocket. Our plan is better in terms of design than our benchmarks for a high deductible. Move over to the right side. When you look at our PPO, it's the opposite. Our deductibles and out of pocket are higher on the PPO than they are for our benchmarks. So I just want to highlight that again from a year ago. So that brings us forward to today. Staff have the benefits committee made up representatives from across the city, largest departments, department heads, and above. And we've had conversations and we looked at options. And so what our proposal is for the upcoming budget year is would like to reduce the health insurance premium by $50 a month. By doing so,
Is that on the high deductible health plan?
It's on across all plans, all tiers, $50 a month. That would put $600 a month back in the pockets of employees. That would also bring our premiums in line with our benchmark peers. In order to fund this, staff is okay with making some slight adjustments to our plan design.
He's in the wrong presentation.
Sorry. Slight adjustments to our plan design, meaning we're going to actually lower the deductibles for our PPO individuals, for our family and out-of-pocket max for family, but we're going to increase slightly our deductibles and out-of-pocket maxes for high deductible plan by $500. That's going to offset some of the cost. And so I'll get to the cost for this on the next slide. One of the things I want to highlight, I know employees are hearing, oh, we're making plan design changes, we're recommending increasing deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums. We did a deep dive into the data and looked at how many people would this impact. There is less than 20% of our employees that hit the deductibles each year. There's less than 5% that hit the out-of-pocket maxes. So the impact by making these plan design changes is going to impact very few individuals across the organization. We also looked at our dental insurance part of the benefit study, and we're one of the only organizations that doesn't contribute anything to dental. Our dental is currently 100% employee funded. So we'd like to take a look at contributing at least half of that cost. And I'll talk about the costs on the next couple of slides. So if we were to reduce our medical premiums by $50 a month, the estimated cost would be $800,000 a year. The dental, again, this depends on how many people decide to enroll in our dental plan. It's going to range from $140,000 to $200,000 a year to make that investment in our dental. For future years, we'd like to get to a point where we can have a free option on our medical plan for one of our plans. If you look at a lot of our peers, they do have a free option for their employees. We would like to increase the contribution in future years to dental, continue to look at our plan design, get them more in line with our peers in terms of deductibles, copays. And then we want to, again, continue to look at reviewing retiree medical benefit options or a supplement, because anyone hired after July or January 1st, 2011 is not eligible for retiree medical insurance. So we need to continue to have conversations to look for options that might be beneficial to those employees to help bridge the gap between when they retire and when they become Medicare eligible. So here is a summary slide, and this is the last slide of the presentation. We gave you a lot of numbers. Again, the mid-year adjustments is at the top, that's 4.7. And the bottom, again, are just the considerations, options for us to consider, for you all to consider moving forward. Laura Mortel mentioned just a moment ago, if we do our adjustments and bring them up to market, we're looking at this year's data. We would need to age that data for next year, because if we don't do anything to the data now, it's going to be out of date come July 1st when all the municipalities make their adjustments. So staff's recommendation is a 2% range adjustment across the board, July 1. In addition to the mid-year adjustments you see up top there. The senior firefighter and police officer would cost $900,000. We talked about that already. And you can see the cost for employee medical for the premium reduction and a dental premium reduction. So I'm gonna stop there and see if there's any questions, comments.
Yeah, 1 second.
With, while you're doing that, with the medical plan, with most of our employees, do they do the PPO or the high?
Most of them are on a high deductible plan.
And you say that most of us don't, meet that deductible.
That's correct. Most of our employees do not. Only less than 20% meet the deductibles, less than 5% meet the out-of-pocket maxes.
The total package is 8.57, just to kind of give us a level setting.
Yes, sir.
What's that as a percentage of lost explain?
I don't know.
So what is last year's?
Oh, well, it's, no, it's total because it's all employees. So it's 2%, something like that. I don't know.
I'll calculate it and give it.
Okay. All right, we'll get a calculation for you on that. I'm trying to do it in my head. It's not working very well. We fully understand that this is a level. And as the mayor says, we're going to have to look at doing things incrementally. But we wanted you to know where we stood with regard to the benefits, how much the employees are paying out of their pocket, which of course directly affects their compensation. So.
we have about 15% of the workforce that doesn't choose our insurance. And it could be for various reasons. Another consideration we talked about by lowering the cost of premiums is our lower paid employees. This might open the door where now they can get our health insurance. That'll get them access to the free clinic downstairs. And so there's a benefit also by reducing it. It gives people more access to our insurance.
You have a pretty high rate of utilization at the clinic downstairs.
We do, yes. I'm looking at my benefits account manager, Keitha Smith.
It's gotten better from being in this building too.
Your 8.5 million is about 3% of total budget.
Last year's budget.
Yes, sir. I was thinking 2.2, 2.5, but 3, yeah.
Rounding.
Yep. Either way,
It's
we're
all
at
rounding.
9.
But we heard your direction.
What is our direction?
Your direction is that I hear thus far is that we need to try to bring this budget in without any sort of tax increase. And that we will be trying to find ways in which to make that happen. But we still have no guidance from you on mid-year adjustment and understanding that the mid-year adjustment has an immediate impact on next year.
It's fund balance this year, but it's rolling the budget next.
Yes, yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you decide, for example, not to do public safety, or excuse me, only do public safety at mid-year, you're still going to have that bigger piece to bite off in June, because in July, when your budget goes into effect, we'll be coming back to you with the adjustment for the non-public safety folks.
Where's our fund balance stand right now?
We just looked at it, it's about 28.5%. Our policy is somewhere between 20 and 25%. The impact current year would be negligible. I mean, it wouldn't be substantial because you're only talking about based on implementation. So if you gave direction today, not speaking out of turn for finance and HR, but in order to turn this around, potentially employees may be able to get it some kind of hit in February, but you're only talking a minimal impact this year in terms of fund balance.
What is the term fund balance in terms of dollars and cents?
I didn't write that one down, see?
You got it.
Our unassigned fund balance is about 45.5 million.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome, sir. And that was as of the end of the year. And we've used,
End of the fiscal year.
but that doesn't include what we've used. So I do want to hesitate a minute and let me backtrack on this one. What did we use this for? Do you remember?
Yes.
We used 9.7 million already this year. That was the question I asked. Do you remember what that was for?
There's 3.5.
I think that was it.
Which one?
The point being is that we feel comfortable taking it out of fund balance each year.
So we're always,
So we used it for the remodel of this building, if you recall, some of it.
$6.5 million.
Yeah, so some of it came from the remodel of this building and the others. So it's actually probably less than 28.5. But we don't typically recalculate in the middle of the year.
Yeah, we calculate it once a year.
But there is enough flexibility to use fund balance for this and actually not go below our 25%. Sorry if I'm speaking it.
You're good.
Thank you. I knew we used something.
Okay.
Thank you.
You want to take a break or you want to move right on into capital improvements? Okay.
Yes, sir. Back in session.
Well, good morning, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council. We'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to give you an update on the city's capital improvement program. As you know, development, administration, execution of the CIP requires extensive internal collaboration between departments and external collaboration and coordination with residential property owners, commercial property owners, and utility operators. Staff appreciates the city council's support by approving the $109 million FY 25 through 29 capital improvement program. Unlike operating expenses that are generally expended within a fiscal year, capital improvement projects, generally speaking, have longer lead times and consequently take months and sometimes years before the project construction gets underway. This presentation's purpose is to provide you with a quick review of the FY 25 through 29 capital improvement program. It's interesting to note that the FY 25 through 29 capital improvement program was preceded by the FY 18 through 23, and then also the FY 12 through 2017 capital improvement programs. Our capital improvement program is divided between 7 programmatic areas. And as we walk through the presentation, the relevant information will be addressed in those areas: the streets and sidewalks, parks and recreation, public facilities, public improvements, stormwater, parking, and golf. We'll touch on and give you an update on some of the existing projects. We will review with you funding gaps. We call them funding gaps. It's overage once the project's been bid. But before we go out to bid and execute a contract, there's funding gaps. The resource is X, what we have available is Y. Thank you. The first project we're going to start with is an update on the Pine Grove Bridge. You'll recall this is one of 2 bridge projects that, through the recommendation of Councilmember Waddell, brought forward to us the Bridge Investment Program. City staff worked in earnest for about 8 months to prepare applications to fund both bridges. The strategy devised was to pursue funding through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We're still waiting for a response on the grant status. At the earliest, we would anticipate response by April or May. So it may be later with the change of administration. But just to recap, on the table, you can see that our project cost is just slightly over 12 million. Funds requested from the federal government is 9.6 million. The local match submitted with the grant application was 2.4 million, and what's available in the FY 25 capital improvement budget is just slightly less than the 2.4 million at 2.375. 4th Street Bridge, another project. Again, 4th Street Bridge has already been weight restricted. We were advised during the process of submitting the Bridge Investment Program grant that that particular project did not fare well in terms of meeting the minimum threshold to be submitted. As a consequence, it was not submitted through the federal program for funding.
What was that, Tom?
Well, they had minimum criteria, cost benefit analysis. There were certain checklists that you had to achieve in order to be submitted. And so our consultants recommended that Pine Grove Bridge met that criteria. But I believe a big part of it was 4th Street Bridge is already in the street network grid. So the cost of having to divert traffic around it is very inexpensive, whereas Pine Grove, you had to really reroute a long way. And so that was one of the biggest factors. It did have a social economic impact in terms of it being on the north side, but in terms of the impact on transportation, it was minimal.
But as far as general everyday traffic, minus big buses and tractor trailers, that's the impact.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
But the bridge is fine.
The bridge is safe to operate, but what the question fine really refers to what limit of weight can traverse it. You can see the sign there says weight limit 10 million. It comes
10 tons.
10 tons, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of dollars. 10 million, 10 tons. And so what we don't want to do, what we're trying to do right now is look and examine avenues to maintain the current load capacity, which may be some rehab, it may be some other major maintenance work to delay having to replace the bridge at this point in time. The available funds that we have for it is 4.4 million. Yes, sir.
Operationally, how do you reduce that load capacity? Just signage?
Well, yes, signage. But we also do a bridge inspection program and we get feedback. You want to explain?
Yes, so we have mandated, NCDOT mandated inspections of all of our bridges and large culverts. And as they periodically update us, they will let us know if the bridge is deteriorated further to where it needs to be further load restrictions. They advise us what that rating is. We work with our traffic engineering folks to have it signed, and then we also send out notifications to police, fire, wave, notifying that the weight restriction has changed.
But as it currently exists, it's safe for vehicular traffic, light trucks, that kind of thing.
Up to 10 tons.
So that would reduce from 10 tons to 8, or, some other justification, then we would just put that up signage wise. Make it pretty prominent.
And we'd like to work to endeavor to at least maintain that current load capacity. So not to let it further deteriorate, that would be the objective. I want to transition to existing project updates, and we'll start with Parks and Recreation. On the way to read this slide is we brought forward to you those capital projects at the top that are in the process, either being constructed, designed, and go out to bid. And you can see that we have 3 projects that in totality are about $1,029,000 over the allocated budget. So we call that a budget gap. At the bottom of the sheet, we look throughout the category of Parks and Recreation to see where is there surplus funds available to cover that overage. And let me just say for a moment, before we make that decision, we try to re-examine the project and the scope and see if there's anything we can do to reduce the cost of the project. So before we look for money, we begin actually doing value engineering, what can be scaled back, re-examine some of our requirements of the project. But once we've done that, we turn to what sources of funds that are available, because we prefer to fund it within the capital improvement program without having to go and get a budget appropriation. At this time, you can see that there's excess funds from Encino, Riverfront Park, Olson Park Phase 2, and also interest within this category. So we still have a gap of about $500,000. There are 2 grants that we're pursuing for Lions Bridge at Greenfield Lake, which will cover the gap if we're awarded. In order to make the Bradley Creek kayak launch a real possibility, we received a grant for that program from the Great Public Beach and Waterfront Access Program. Just an update on the status of that project. Bids will be sent to purchasing in a couple of weeks. And then the final estimate of where we are in terms of the budget will be in better position to tell you once the bids are received and we review them. Just want to go quickly through Olson Park Staff Maintenance Building. Staff has been working with the design team and outside contractors to refine the cost as the metal building costs provided were beyond what was anticipated. We'll refine the costs prior to making a decision on whether or not to reduce the building size.
Is there a building there now?
No, you remember that old, there's not a building now. This would be a brand new building. They were using a house
I remember
before
that.
Florence.
Got destroyed in Hurricane Florence.
Pardon me?
The house that came with the property that was being utilized for maintenance was destroyed during Hurricane Florence.
Gotcha.
Isn't this the last bit of our FEMA money too? Isn't it tied to that as well? There's FEMA money tied to it, and that's one of the reasons we have outstanding, is waiting for that project to complete.
On Lions Bridge, the gap identified is for construction funds. As I mentioned earlier, if we receive the grant, we'll be able to cover the gap. If the gap is not covered, you may recall staff advising City Council at the September 17th, 2024 meeting that if we didn't have the grant, we would have to shift to the least desirable option, which would reduce the cost by about $400,000. What that would mean, though, is we had proposed to council, and you were supportive, was to have a bridge with a 12-foot clearance, 10-foot wide bridge. If we can't have that, if we didn't have the grant, we have to go to 6 feet wide with 6 feet clearance. And so less desirable, it still would be ADA compliant. But our desire is it'd be more of a boardwalk than actual bridge, if you will, and that's the signature piece for the park. We'll keep moving along, transitioning to the public facilities funding gaps. The parks staff maintenance building funding gap right now is $870,000. Our team's been working with the design team to refine costs. We're looking at avenues to cover that cost. Available funds, as you can see at the bottom, to come from the training facility for police and fire. There were two projects that were funded for City Hall, one of which was, you may recall, we were going to redesign and make some improvements to the lobby outside the city manager's office and the mayor's office, as well as do some renovation work on the lower floor, which was formerly the city clerk's office and communications. And so those projects, since we moved out of that building, are no longer necessary to occur. River Place had a positive balance where funds could be utilized, as well as interest from the capital improvement program that's been unallocated. So you can see there, we've got a positive surplus. Again, we want to emphasize, just because the money is available doesn't mean we're not trying to restrict costs and fall within the budgeted funds. Streets and sidewalk gap. Several projects up there we want to review with you. Independence Boulevard screen wall. That's from our second 80-20 plan or CIP. Funding gap is projected to be about $200,000. Hooker, Hinton, Riceville, and Greenville, multi-use path. You can see the 17th Street multi-use path, the local grant match. Just to touch on a couple of these, the Independence Boulevard screen wall, that amount is for construction, the gap. The actual amount would be based on bids received. The project is currently on hold, so we can focus on some other projects. Hooker, Hinton, again, that amount shown is strictly for the construction. Once bids are received, we'll have a better indication where we really are. That's projected cost. Hooker Hinton project is currently in purchasing to be put out to bid. I think I saw a notice yesterday that it's out on the street, so.
It advertised.
Yeah,
Tom, the Independence Boulevard screen wall, that's the existing wall there.
yes.
Is
Yes, it is. Not a replacement, it was to improve the
It looks like hell.
It's the aesthetics. 17th Street multi-use path. We have a local match partially funded, $600,000 is needed. The bike ped committee has already allocated $100,000 towards that. So the $500,000 gap is the balance. We believe that the majority of this cost was to allow pedestrian infrastructure to be installed at Independence and Shipyard Boulevard and 17th Street. Shipyard Boulevard and 17th Street. Design is restarted on the project, but that construction funding has been identified so we could move forward if needed to be. Front Street Bridge, Cape Fear Community College, the gap identified is for construction. Actual amount would be clear once we receive bids. The project was sent to purchasing recently, and it should be released for bid in a few weeks. Downtown Trail Phase 1, you see the funding gap of $490,000. That funding gap right now is related to the additional design work that was necessary to accommodate requirements from CSX as well as NCDOT. Additional scope items added to the design contract included adding retaining walls and storm drainage infrastructure within the rail corridor. Once the design is completed, potential grants may be identified to help offset that funding gap.
Tom, the Front Street Bridge, what's wrong with that one?
That's a deck rehab replacement.
It's the first time I've heard of that one.
It was in a CIP.
Was it?
Yes, sir. It's been identified. It may have actually been in a lot of.
No, it's in the FY 25 to 29 CIP in the first year, and it's a deck replacement and then substructure repairs to extend the life of that bridge.
We'll transition to transportation bond program. We have a document to distribute as well, so that we rolled up the projected budget gap for all the projects, and Kevin will pass this out. We'll go through this sheet. I think this will be of interest to all of you, and we'll sort of explain what you have in front of you. So the sheet that we distributed is the transportation bond financial summary as of January 30th. If you're starting from the left, you will see the project description. And then to the right, you would have project type, the status of the project as of this particular reporting period, the original project budget. Then you move right, you'll see current project budget, project cost, funding remaining or needed, and then whether or not funds have been encumbered or unencumbered. So I'm going to use Eastwood Road Access Management. That was a roadway improvement project that was designed to be completed in conjunction with Lidl's, if you remember. And so that project is a roadway project. Phase 1 has been completed and closed out. Phase 2 is under construction. The original project budget was $4.9 million. The current project budget is 5.1. Current project cost projection cost is 3.9. Funds remaining. You can see what we have available and then unencumbered funds. So we have this sheet for all the bond projects in totality. If you were to just follow the funding gap from page 1 to the second page, funding remaining or funding needed, you will see at the bottom line total, that number 19,141,000 pretty much mirrors the funding gap that's shown there. What we have on the transportation bond projects, we track the cost throughout every project, working with finance, budget, as well as the engineering group. They're tracking that cost. And we're trying to identify avenues once we've exhausted those options to reduce costs, contain costs. How can we fund that overage or that projected overage within the streets and sidewalk program using transportation bond funds and so forth? So what we have there, if you can see, there are two options that we identified. The first option was to fund some of the gap with debt capacity. We had skipped a year of the CIP to finish projects, and there was debt capacity available. And working with finance, staff identified it as an avenue to cover some of that gap. At the time, it was over a year ago, about a year or two ago. That gap was about 10 million, and we were doing pretty well in covering it. The Riverwalk North Marina was a project that we had brought forward to council, and the options that were presented originally were to reconstruct that Marina Riverwalk. What was approved by council and what staff ultimately found and recommended was to use polyurethane injection to elevate it and provide some money. So that saved us a significant amount. And those funds, as a result of that approach to repairing the marina, created some capacity to be shifted elsewhere. When you think about, you still have a gap of $10 million, you say, well, what's going to happen? And so the staff is working to look at, well, what are the avenues that could be available? Potentially, it could be defer construction of Carr Avenue Trail and submit that project to the WMPO for grant funding. That would potentially save approximately $1.8 million. We could reallocate unused funds from the cost sharing agreement that the city had with NCDOT for the 23rd to 26th Street connection. If you remember that, we sent you a letter that indicated the DOT would delay doing that work and tie it into the Independence extension. That would potentially free up about $1.79 million. We could defer construction of a transportation bond project and pursue other funding sources to complete that project. And then potentially, this is not desirable, but we're trying to just lay all the considerations that staff at least considered. Reallocate the first year and second year of the transportation mobility funding to the transportation bond program to cover the gap, and that would be about $3 million.
What's transportation mobility fund?
That was the 20
Vehicle tax.
the vehicle tax that city council approved with this year's budget.
What I want to do last
Definitely certainly could have been. One of the things, I think that was a possibility, so we could use that money to complete some of the transportation bond projects. We've got other work that the staff, when they're brought on board, to begin working and designing for the first 2 years, so we can pick up and complete that work. It's important to note that we've got a number of large projects that are out for bid. And we had, my recollection is it was the Pine Grove North. Pine Grove North bids were due on Tuesday of this week. And staff advised me that we received 0 bids. That was surprising because I think 2 or 3 construction entities had requested the design packs.
100 north of the roundabout.
That's the Macmillan and the reorientation of Oleander Pine Grove intersection.
By Hume Crow Park.
Oh,
And so, not receiving any bids, that was sort of somewhat surprising. Is it 2 or 3 firms that had?
There were 3 large contractors that had received the design packages, to bid. We reached out to all 3 of them. One of them didn't bid because they couldn't get numbers from one of their subs in time. Another one didn't bid because they had just been successful in a couple of other bids and didn't want to bid that project any longer. The third one we haven't heard from. Both of the first 2 contractors requested additional time and that they would submit bids. And we're also reaching out to some of the other larger general contractors to figure out why they haven't requested plans and why they're not bidding the project. Depending on what we're here, we'll either put it out for an additional 2 more weeks to give those 2 contractors time to bid, or we'll put it out for another month if we have some new contractors that indicate some interest in bidding the project. We were hoping to gauge the level of how strong our estimates are against that bid on one of those larger projects. So we were very disappointed not to receive any bids.
You've got to go back out.
You got to go back out. I think it's an indication of the market in the area, how busy contractors are. And I also think some of the larger contractors are doing a lot of work out in Western North Carolina.
This is the most alarming slide to me. I think it represents abject failure. I mean, it's a $20 million deficit on a decades-long transportation bond. You know, failure to deliver quite a few projects, failure to begin some projects. And it reflects poorly on the future. I think we could, have a year, have a transportation ad hoc, but to me, we got to make some difficult decisions on projects that have not begun yet, haven't moved dirt. We may have done right-of-way acquisitions, we may have a little bit of cash outlay there, but you're talking about, we're trying to find money on couch cushions to cover this $20 million allocation, or this $20 million gap. And it's compounding. Every day we're not beginning, it's compounding. It's been compounding. So I'm going to advocate that we take a look at these projects. I advocated last year unsuccessfully that we look at the CB Road Streetscape project. And then just last week, we approved some right-of-way acquisitions for Dawson and Worcester beautification project. I mean, those are millions of dollars in and of themselves that we still haven't begun. These are things that I think we have to have kind of tough decisions ahead of us on to have these discussions of what's maybe just not feasible. So I guess my question would be, what obligation do we have legally, if any, if we were not to do a transportation bond project that was part of the overall 2014 transportation bond?
So we checked with the bond council, and if council decided that there's a bond project that was part of the referendum that you don't want to proceed because the resources aren't there financially, we could do that, and we could allocate the money to some other bond project.
It has to remain within the bond project.
Right. You couldn't, take transportation bond money for the do something unrelated to it.
Makes sense.
We could not do a project, and it's not uncommon that you can't finish a bond program of what the referendum was. And so sometimes projects aren't completed in the initial referendum. It takes a subsequent bite. And we could also look at some of those bond program projects being funded through grants and other avenues to close the gap. It may be helpful also to point out the debt capacity. That 6.2 million does not translate into 6.2 million in cash that can be moved over spent. that is the financing capacity. About 80% of it is debt. Only about 20% or so of the 6.2 million will really be cash.
That's not our total debt capacity, right? That's
No,
just-
that's just what's allocated.
That's been carved out specifically for this.
Okay. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, can I continue on this train of thought? We touched on it briefly, but last year I also advocated unsuccessfully to contribute 100% of the revenue from the vehicle registration that we increased to $25 to CIP needs rather than create a traffic calming program. I know there was 2 new FTEs to facilitate that program that were created. Have either of those been filled yet?
No. It's still being recruited.
So we've got a revenue model there that we can utilize. We can fund some of these projects. Do we know what the amount of that, if we were to shift that?
We would have each year about $1.5 million that could be utilized as cash.
Right.
So it could go towards something, or we could have a discussion about sort of financing, using it as a financial model.
To increase that debt capacity?
Yeah.
With the idea with the bond, transportation bond project, these are projects that the citizens pay a voting on.
Right.
You know, saying we're gonna do this. Now I'm hearing you say that, if we started a project and it didn't finish, we can actually not finish that and go to something else. Explain that to me.
Finish what you've started.
The bond program, transportation bond program, if there are projects that because of what was originally in the referendum do not cover the total cost of the program, you could make the decision and say, we want to do this work. It's important to the community. However, there's not enough resources to do it. We'll do it later when other resources become available. We can do that. And we make to save money, we can prioritize which ones need to be finished. One of the biggest projects is Pine Grove South, which I would say we definitely need to do that one. That's got 2 roundabouts. It's Greenville Loop Road and Holly Tree. So but that is an opportunity. We just need to go through the bond project and let you see if there's any of them that you'd like us to halt besides what you recommend.
To that end, I think that point, what I don't, because we had some of this discussion last year and it was like, well, we've already started on that project because we've begun right-of-way acquisition. To me, that we could be throwing good money after that if that's our kind of our mindset that we've already started right-of-way acquisition. That's pennies on the dollar. We don't, I mean, how does the right-of-way acquisition work? We've already completed it, but we haven't actually broken ground on anything yet. What's the legal ramification for us? Do we give it back?
I'm going to defer to the legal expert at the end of the table, although I have an answer.
We're not gonna be able to get that money to pay those acquisitions back.
That's not what I was asking, but that property is ours. We own that property. We own those easements. We're not under any sort of legal obligation.
Except for construction easements, which may be temporary in nature, correct?
That would drop dead, they would come along.
They are likely to go away.
So then if it's picked up years from now, we have to compensate them for the construction easement, which again will be temporary.
Yeah. And there would have been utility relocation costs that we would have incurred, for utilities moving out of our required right of way. So it's not a straight, easy line, but we could analyze where there's a good breaking point, complete the right of way acquisition, utility relocation. And the construction is really what these dollars reflect. That gap reflects the estimate for construction. And we try to be very conservative, and we, as Denise said, we wanted to look at one of the big projects coming in for bids to have a barometer, if you will, of how conservative, are we being too conservative, or are we not being conservative enough? We think we're being conservative. That's our job, is to err on the side of caution and not be, providing the best case scenario. This is probably the worst case scenario, but we don't really know until we get the bids and see what the appetite is in the market. It's hard to say.
I want to go back to a comment Tom made in passing. It is not unusual for you to go into a bond issue with an appetite for projects and not be able to complete that entire list. And the mayor will remember one in particular from our joint city-county recreation bond many years ago. We had money in there for a natatorium. which had strong, local, well, you won't remember too, strong local support, up until the time it came time to do it. And there was a project that just needed to go. And ultimately we had to, pass on that project. So it is not unusual simply because of cost increases in time. So
We had set aside $700,000 for that and then put it back in the general fund, I guess.
So my point is, it may be abject failure as Councilman Waddell characterizes it, but it's not unusual for it to happen.
But we need to recognize it as a council and, in my opinion, stop the bleeding. Make some difficult decisions.
Most of these, that were not completed. No, most of these on this list were completed, or are completed. Yeah. And what stopped them from being completed is, they went on a time, or is it, it costs more because if they wait a year and a half to buy the supplies on them.
There are, there are a variety of factors that lead to cost increases. Over time, our forecasts for, this bond election was in 2014, you would have been forecasting what prices would be 5-6 years ago in 2012, 2013. The market's changed dramatically. That's part of it. We had, I think also bond programs tend to be aspirational. You're trying to get as much as you can accomplished with the minimal amount of burden to the taxpayers. And so it's some of the work that once we passed the bond referendum, we had to do some deeper dive to do analysis of what was really feasible to construct. Once we determined that, that also impacted the scope of the project. So the costs would change as a result, and in some cases, the scope became larger. 2 dual roundabouts, if you will, on one of the Pine Grove corridor things, for instance. So those elements you discover after the bond referendum, I wouldn't really consider it to be a failure. It's more of, we could have, you want to build what's appropriate. So you had to do a deeper dive after the referendum. It changes and alters what was perceived to be the scope. There was good work done on the front end planning, but also we didn't spend a couple $1 million on the front to invest in a lot of preliminary design. And I think those are some things you may want to do sometimes is have, instead of looking from 30,000 feet and say what's on the ground, you may want to get a 1,000 foot view. So you do the best you can based on the distance you're guesstimating. And so I think we did a really good job. It was very ambitious. We hope to leverage other dollars. We had partners. There were, for instance, we had worked with Carolina Beach Road is a partnership with NCDOT. DOT originally moved that project back several years. So that meant we moved back and now they moved it back forward. Staff worked for 2 years with UNCW on the Hearst Drive, if you remember. So there've been a lot of projects that we invest significant staff resources to execute that only get to a point where the parties that we're working with say, we can't do, we're not doing it or we're not going to be able to do it at this point in time.
Well, to be fair to everybody, you also had Hurricane Florence.
Yeah.
And you also had COVID. So you lost 2 years right there. And you also had a staffing issue in regards to engineering. We had to hire some more engineers, and I think being ambitious about this particular project, we didn't staff up enough to complete what we needed to do at the time frame. It came back late. I don't know how many years later. But look at that. It's like, we can look at some of these projects and tell them what you don't want to do or what you want to do, what can be the money. They're going down the road. I do think that the Greenville Loop Trail is important for a lot of different ways. First of all, a lot of those people in that part of the community, this is one of the largest projects in Loveland, came out to support this project. And they've been waiting patiently for this project. That is a very, it's probably one of our toughest roads in town because there is no interconnectivity with only Andy Drive. There's people who want to get out on the road. It's pretty dangerous out that way. On either end. On either end. So that to me is a very important project for our community. It's something we can do. Some of the roundabouts and some of the other stuff I can pass, but that's just Pine Grove is, we will live this.
Our engineering group reminds me, and it's worth sharing with you. I attend their monthly capital improvement program management meetings, and there's about 60 pages that are printed out to go over all the projects. And so while we're looking at just these few, there's a whole slew of other projects that we're not reviewing with you that go well with the budgets not being over, they executed well. You saw in some of those projects that we, in the different funding categories, that there were surpluses, which meant that they were managed very well. I think but we learned a lot of lessons from this particular bond program, and one of them is that it pays to maybe invest a little bit more if we can afford it. If you can't afford it, to do some preliminary work and preliminary design, things like that. We did feasibility studies after the bond program, if you remember, for the final corridor. And so I think council should be proud of the work that's been done, but we recognize we may be pushing up against some other realities financially.
Would council like for us to put together a prioritized list? It will at least give you a starting point from which to work in terms of being able to call down these projects. It will not necessarily be reflective of your individual priority, but it'll be one based upon what the staff knows about your collective priorities and where we are in construction on those projects.
How much of it is complete now?
I don't have it committed to.
Out of all the projects that we have, we 80%, 60%, well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to go through and calculate a percentage for you, but more projects are complete than are incomplete. And we have, Pine Grove North and Wrightsville Avenue, Overhead is not part of the transportation program, but those are over and purchasing, they're out for bid. So Greenville Loop Trail Section 2 and 3 are as close to being in purchasing as they can be without actually being in. We've got permits in hand for Greenville Loop 2, and construction documents are coming in from the designer in the next week and a half. So that one will be over in purchasing very soon. Dawson Wooster, right-of-way acquisitions, executor agreement with DOT, and that one's going to purchasing. So we have a lot of them that are knocking at the door. The two that are the farthest out from going to construction are the Carr Avenue Trail, because we just started property acquisition, and Pine Grove South, we're finalizing the easement map, and offers on that are about to go out. But to me, that's one of the most important projects in the bond, and it's going to have the most impact on that project. I think that we could look at the $1 million that's been set aside for the Front Street quadrant intersection improvements project. That's landscaping. And we've already pulled the funding from the rest of the Carolina Beach Road Streetscape project. We could go in potentially after DOT finishes their project, and if we want to do additional landscaping in there, we could do that at that time.
What is that number on the Carolina Beach?
It's $1 million.
I had 4.1 in my presentation from last year. What is that?
So there was a bigger number appropriated for that. We pulled money from that to fund other needs during the FY 25-29 budget process. That money got pulled out of that project during that. And we left $1 million in to do some landscaping at the quadrant intersection. We could pull that $1 million out and apply it to the gap. Again, once we get some of these larger projects bid and the numbers are coming in, we'll know whether or not that 8 million is going to hold.
Well, I guess the question would be, I mean, we've been talking about how many interchanges with the DOT. I'm just wondering what the cost of those things are. I mean, that money was appropriated, what, 10 years ago? I mean, we talked about it 10 years ago. I wonder what those numbers look like. Sure you would. If we had to, I know you guys gonna have to.
Yeah, I've made, it's interesting you brought that up. I made note of interchange funding. We could consider just having the interchanges be basic and not do the enhancements, and take those funds that are way out in the future and recover them and transfer them.
We're still waiting for an interchange, right? We've been talking about this since.
I would just hate for 15 years from now that interchange to come about and somebody say, darn, I wish we'd have put that emblem on that buttress.
We'll let you get out there and paint it, Tony.
I won't be around then, sir.
The first one is scheduled to start 26.
I'll bet you. I'll bet you right now.
Here's my concern.
Yeah.
My concern is that we don't have a mechanism for setting a priority for these projects. And that's a conversation that I've had with Tom in the very near future. And so, to me, we're just bouncing around. We need to formulate a mechanism that sets priority, and we need to go through that list for completion. Because otherwise, we're just bouncing all over town, doing one little bit here, doing one little bit there, throwing money over here, throwing money over there, and we don't really have a real record of accounting for what's being done. Again, I guess this is the mood I'm in today. But I mean, again, if we're having a work session, let's really talk about what's really transpiring in our community. And so I think that's needed. And so when we find these things, or when we stumble upon these things, that's the issue. And again, the mayor said it, and we're bouncing around. Things that should have been completed years ago are not. And then we put new things on the list, and that takes precedence over what needs to be done. But I think you would get more positive interaction from people in this community if they were actually seeing things being done that needed to be done, that we asked them for their approval of years ago, decades ago, and we still haven't done it. So I think that's the thing that needs to happen first. A concrete mechanism that sets precedent on what takes place within the city of Wilmington as it relates to capital improvement projects.
Yes. I think the lesson to be learned, and it's just long lesson, long time learning, is the next time a bond issue is done, make it a hell of a lot shorter. I mean, that was a very aggressive, and of course, you know, we went to 2014, 2016. 14. I was on that committee where we were doing vetting all the, you know, the places to put on it, and Amy did a yeoman's job putting all that stuff together. We just do it all, you know, and like time to think about taking some of it off.
What's the 2 million public transportation? Is that, it's a footnote at the bottom?
That was WAVE, wasn't it? There was bond program funding for WAVE, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Where's that money?
That's how they included.
I need to look it up.
I think that money's already been spent. I think
A lot of it has been spent.
Mike can answer that.
It was set aside for public transportation, and it was set aside specifically the way I think it's supposed to be.
Yeah. We use it for their capital requests every year, so we don't have to come back and use general funds.
So we get capital requests from them every year.
Yes.
The Councilmember Spears, just to help the rest of the council members who went in that conversation you and I had about balancing it, it was specifically related to street resurfacing, which is, you know, the street resurfacing is part of the capital improvement program. And the question that some of Councilmember Spears' constituents asked, well, you pave this road and that road, but you missed this road over here. And I was explaining to him that we have that situation throughout the city. We're trying to be equitable with the number of streets. There's not enough funds to just pave an entire area. So we do look at the worst condition, and it doesn't mean there aren't other streets nearby that are in the same condition. Just don't have the capacity to do everything that we'd like to do for a neighborhood. And so we have a multi-year approach. That was really the context of that conversation, not the bond program itself.
Well, thanks for that, Tommy. And since you wanted to go there, I'll dig a little bit deeper. When you pave one street in a community or part of town that's bad, and then you hop over to the other part of town, by the time you get back to that community, the street that you paved has started to deteriorate. And so now you got another new looking street in that community. And so I just would say, I'm a cent. Come in, pave everything, be done, and then move on to the next project. So to me, yeah, that's the number one reason why I say there's no mechanism. And there's also going to be no conformity that takes place when you just do one, go 10 blocks over, do another, come back 3 years later,
and then start on the Second Street in the community. I don't even see the sense in that, if I'm being honest.
So like, can we get a plan that contemplates the prioritization of projects that have not begun?
I think we can bring you back a prioritization based upon, again, what we know about your priorities and what we feel about where we are in the projects. Get you something back, and then you can
Could that plan also contemplate utilizing $1.5 million that we have in the
I think it certainly could, yes.
I do want to clarify that it technically cannot be used for debt service, so you can't leverage it unless you're willing to ongoingly commit to it. So to answer that question, it was mentioned. I know, but that would be the commitment. So if you say 1.5 million and you want to leverage debt, you would have to commit that to debt service to do that. But it could be used 1.5 just as cash in terms of play.
I'd be nice to see what that does to the debt service. I mean, if that leverage.
How much debt capacity it did, we can look into what 1.5, again, that would be an ongoing commitment of that revenue in the future.
The 1.5 is the vehicle registration that we did last year. We basically created a program. This
would shift that to ongoing debt service.
We can do that as well.
Lock it in.
Lock it in by resolution of council, yes, sir.
I would just like to add though, I need to check because I think there are restrictions on all those funds can be used for.
Yeah. It has to be used for local streets.
No state roads.
But at our discretion.
Yes.
Yeah.
As long as it's local, yeah.
Right, but I mean, what I mean is we ain't got to turn right around, deallocate that and turn right around and spend it on this, other, you're not accomplishing
I
anything.
guess, Meredith's concern would be whether or not we can leverage it through debt capacity, which that's something we have to figure out. Meredith, is that there?
Yeah,
We'll work through that. Yeah, I understand what your concern is.
We'd have to figure out how to allocate.
We may or may not be able to use it through debt service. We'll investigate that.
Need to call Guido.
So the last element of your 5-year capital improvement program is.
We're done with this.
Yes, sir. Is the what we call the program unfunded. And you will recall that the program unfunded projects are those projects that meet the strategic priorities of the city. However, there's either inadequate capacity such as funding partners, financial restrictions, or further planning is needed before the project can be included into the 5-year CIP. There are approximately 42 projects recorded in the program unfunded FY 25-29 capital improvement program. And the intent is these projects would be considered first should conditions change such that capital funds became available or internal capacity were available to move forward on the projects. Council can adjust these the remaining years of the overall capital improvement program as you desire. So, we have years FY 26, 27, 28, 29 within the 5-year CIP. We could come back to, you could look at those projects that are in your budget and say, we'd like to move forward with these. We want to defer these, and we can certainly have that conversation. At this time, that wraps up the information that staff had to present to you on the capital improvement program. And we've got all the members of the team that worked on this work here available to answer any additional questions you may have.
This, I want to qualify this unfunded project list is designed to be an availability issue. If a grant comes available that may fit this particular project on this list, but doesn't fit on one of the existing CIP projects, then that's the reason for it to be available.
Have looked at before and said, if we had the money, we'd love to do this.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think it's germane to the capital improvement conversation. Where are we at with the skyline improvement? The council chambers and all that project? Are we looking to be on budget at 6.3, or do you think it's gonna be higher?
The maximum price not to exceed from Monteith was actually lower by several $100,000. There are some non-bid ad alternates that we would like to get pricing on, that we're gonna, once we get past probably Aprilish, we'll probably bring back to you in terms of options. We're just talking to Councilman Ravenbach about that. And you can, if there's money left over, you can so choose to apply them to those ad alternates or put it back in the general fund balance where it came from.
We'll get a sign on the building.
Other questions about CIP or? Thank you. We appreciate it. We are obviously ahead of schedule. Towing fees.
I think lunch is here.
Pardon me. Towing fees is next. Towing fees is next. I was, lunches.
Should be here.
It's not quite here yet. But if Meredith wants to go ahead with the towing fees and roll this in, then we can go ahead and knock it out. You can stay for lunch and be gone after that if you'd like. Unless, of course, you're a member of the Inspection Committee.
Sorry, Dawn said it would be, I didn't.
So I did send out yesterday, a copy of this presentation, we did receive that. Also, should all have copies of that, and you should all have, that's what you did, a copy of the current contract, just to make sure that any interest in one that you guys already, and so we can help cover some of this later. So Mr. Spears, obviously, is emailing that to you right now, so we'll also. So starting at the beginning, just to bring everybody up to speed, we have not been here for the last 2 years. We did make some rotation list changes back in the start. I want to clarify before we start though that the city's fee schedule regarding towing only applies to towing when the city calls them for towing on city property or city lots. So none of these fees apply in private lots. We did at one point have towing from private lots, and that was allowed, but state law has changed since then after a court case out of Chapel Hill. And so the city cannot restrict towing from private lots.
These, when you say city stuff, that's when they're in the rotation.
These are only, yes, towing companies that have elected to be part of the city's rotation record list.
Okay.
So which is fine.
When you say, if I park in a private lot, and
They
they
can charge
told
you whatever they want based on their contract with the private property owner. So for an apartment complex or a large, like the mall or something like that. And
But in any instance where the city is involved, this applies.
if the city calls for a rotation record, yes. So most of the time that's going to occur in one of two situations. In a situation where there's been an accident, or in a situation where the city is towing from city property, like if we have bag meters along downtown for Azalea Festival and you have left your vehicle there, or for something like that, we would call in people off the rotation record to be towed from that. So if the city is involved, then that's, or if the vehicle has broken down, not had a wreck, which is not operable in city space or something like this.
And a policeman comes along, what's wrong? My car's broke down, the policeman makes the call. But if that private citizen makes the call, this doesn't apply.
Correct. And so if your car breaks down in front of your, in a parking space that's a city space in the historic district, and you make the call yourself to a tow company, then none of these apply. So all of these fees are only applicable for city initiated tows on city property, not by private tows on private property. We cannot control those. So in those situations, the private property owners and the tow truck companies can charge whatever they wish. There's no restriction. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that before we got started. Before 2023, our towing rates and regulations hadn't been updated since 2009. And so that's kind of what started this conversation. The tow truck companies, several of them came to us and said, we need some increases. This has been over 15 years. Almost 15 years. And so in 2023, what we did was we did increase the base towing rotation fee for our records by $40. We stopped charging for some things and then we allowed them to charge for others. So the base, in total went up by $40. So that was but at the same time, we also did revise the insurance requirements because we didn't really have any prior to that point because we did not require a contract at the time. And I'm not certain why that was before my time in 2009, but we weren't currently requiring a contract with the tow companies in order for them to be on our rotation list. And so when we initiated the need to have a contract, then we also instituted, as part of that contract, basic insurance requirements. And all of our insurance requirements were $250,000 for all applicable policies. So with towing, that's a garage, that's general liability policy, a garage keeper's liability policy, and a general garage policy. So there were 3 different kinds of insurance that they would have. And we used $250,000 at that point, standard with all of our other vendor contracts that we used throughout the city. So that was where that number. They had also made some requests for changes to rules or regulations back in 2023. That was not done at the time. It was determined that a lot of those rules and regulation changes would unfairly impact smaller tow companies. And so the rules and regulations didn't change, but the price did go up for a base tow. And then we had the contracts initiated.
Can you just maybe name 1 or 2 of those things that they asked for that they didn't get?
There is a slide a little bit later.
Okay.
To talk about some of
Thank
those,
you.
so I can just wait,
Sure.
but I will talk about that. The next page is what we allowed prior to 2023, just to give you an idea of what our basic totals were prior to 23. And you'll see that that's a range. And so the range that you'll see for a total towing cost was $235 to $285 prior to 2023. And the lower end of that is for the non-collision tows, and the higher end of that is for the collision tows. So there's a difference in the base, and there's a collision involved, particularly more difficult than just putting a car up on it.
Well, tell me about wait time when a record.
Wait time is if they're on the scene. Wait time usually doesn't come into effect unless there is a wreck, and it's usually if they have to wait there for the police to finish what they're doing for fire to finish what they're doing. And so unless there's a collision involved, waiting time typically does not apply totally, because otherwise they would just come out and put it on the record. And so we did have storage, $25 a day, release of a vehicle outside of business hours. To be honest, for most people that work, it is difficult because they've got a 8 to 5 schedule in office. So most vehicles are released after hours, and people folks can get off work and get there. So that's kind of a typical charge that's included, and a dolly charge of $35, and then also cleanup charges, which are generally, if there's any type of wreck, they're required to clean up the mess in the middle. There are little bits and pieces of lights or some type of fluid or something like that on the road. The wreck
So there's no extra for that. That's included in their base for the rotation.
The cleanup was included.
Okay.
If you'll turn the page to the current fees, this is what they changed to at that point. For the base rotation, we moved to 200 to 250, which was increased from 100 to 150. So that was a $100 increase there. Cleanup still included in the rotation fee. Storage, we increased to $30 a day instead of 25. Release of the motor vehicle outside of hours, we increased to 45 from 35, additional $10 there. The dolly, however, we included in the we moved to include that in the rotation charge because it was being used every single time. There's very seldom an actual tow that does not involve using the dolly. And most of the places that we looked at as comparators did not include a dolly or windshield or anything like that.
So that in effect kind of diluted their bumps.
The $100, yes, it's subtracted from the $100 increase that we given update.
Okay.
And then also with the wait time, we now include that in the rotation fee as well, because that usually isn't used. There's not a lot of times where the wait, unless it's a high impact collision with requires a lot of police response, fire response, a fatality, and major rollouts or something like that. That's usually not used, and so most places include the wait time in there because it's not something that they use a lot.
So when you take into account the dolly and the wait time, what was the net
So the
increase
net
to
was the
them?
$40 that I mentioned previously. So the net total was a $40 increase in what their base was going to be. And so that's kind of where we are now. And so now we come back and they have made additional requests. And so if it's turning the page, these are going to be what these are what the proposed fees are. I'll note for you one thing before we get started is that they have made a differentiation between electric and hybrid vehicles in this and imposed an additional 125 to plus on hybrid vehicles, actually basically 150 as a base for towing an electric vehicle, saying that they've got to secure it, they've got to disconnect batteries, they've got to have special spots for them. And we have not found any other comparator that actually makes a differentiation between electric and regular vehicles. It is true that they are being required to do some additional things in order to store those vehicles. They are required to disconnect the batteries and things like that, but it's none of the other cities that we've looked at make a distinguish in their fees between electric vehicles and regular. So that is not going to be part of I'll get to our recommendations at the end. That's not part of our recommendation. I'm not aware of anything that would give us a reason to.
Well, I visited several of these lots and they're in and around Wilmington. And they don't have 2 and 3 acre salvage yards. They have something not a whole lot bigger than this room we're in. And that electric vehicle is required to have, Luke helped me. It was like 25 to 50 feet around that you can't put anything in that space. And that vehicle takes up valuable space for other cars that they're towing. And they're left out in the cold. So I strongly disagree with that. That puts a real onus on them to have to provide for that, and they can't deny. They can't go out there and say, "I'm not going to take that." Once they're called, they have to go, and they have to take that vehicle. So I feel their pain.
I don't know.
I'm not aware of how many vehicles the city.
State regulations.
Has to tow that are.
State ratings.
So I don't know what that percentage is. We actually distinguish. That'd be another thing is that we don't actually distinguish between when they call for electric. Other ones, I don't know that we can keep track of that. That number that you see is kind of taking up on the left where it says storage. It's $40 per spot times the number of spots. And that's what that is for, that if you've got to have 2 additional spots on either side, they're actually going to charge you $200 a day based on $40 per spot, because you're actually going to be taking up 5 spots.
This is their proposal.
This is their proposal. Plus $125 for energy security evaluation and replace cars, placard on it, and reconnect the backplate. So those are the ones that are specific to electric or hybrid business. On the left, they want to leave the current rotation charge where it is, which is 200 and 250. But then they want to bring back out the other charges that we have included in. They want to go at $75 for a dolly, which will be the charge that will be used pretty much every time. Cleanup for $100 an hour. They essentially have to do some form of cleanup for every accident. So that would be an automatic in every collision case, would be at least 100. It'd be more if it was more than that. The daily storage increased to 60 for inside, 40 outside per day. $40 for release outside of business hours. An extra $200 if your vehicle is overturned, so you had a bad accident. $200 for windshield, which is going to be applied to virtually every accident case. Additional truck or manpower, those will usually come in with a major accident or fatality case when they have to call in another truck. Admin fee, I have no idea what that is, other than it would be added to every charge, whether It's a collision or not. So that's really where they're adding back in $100 to your base, essentially. On that. Crash wrap, it's got $100, but basically what it is $25, the number of windows that they wrap up. So most cars, it's gonna be $100, and that will happen in most accidents where there is some sort of, window involvement. They'll do the crash wrap around all of it, to make sure nothing is flying on. Salvage pullout, when you pick it up, on-scene wait time, an additional $250 after the first hour. Mileage outside of the city limits, $4.50 per mile. Most of the places that, most of the municipalities do not have a mileage limit. That is strictly coming from the highway patrol because they cover statewide end to end. And so that's something that patrol uses, but most municipalities do not have anything for the mileage. So those are the proposed fees. The turnover, I'm not talking about examples, how that's been affected, but I just wanted to walk through with you. These were not the only examples. These are just some that I came up with just so you can see how the basic minor collision and major collisions would work out. The first is basic collision, a non-collision with the tow. You have a $200 base charge, $75 for dolly, $200 for winching if your car doesn't start, which is assumingly why you would be calling, plus the $100 admin fee. So the base tow for a non-collision in this situation would be $575 just for a regular vehicle. It'd be $725 for a lesser vehicle, which includes the battery and that doesn't include the spots because theoretically, if you're just being called for a non-collision, you're going to be towing into a repair shop as opposed to storage for the most part. And so I did not include storage fees in the non-collision tows. Because most of it in part of the shop did not do that. So $575 to $725 is what your basic non-collision price is going to be for a citizen. The next example is a minor collision, so no rollover, no fatality, no major damage. We'll have the 250 base charge for collision, $75 for the dolly, $200 for winching, $100 for the admin fee, $100 for cleaning up because they're required to do that. $40, it's just going to be stored for one day, even until you get some your insurance company. Say you got to get your insurance company to approve where you're going to take it to. So basics would be one day, and then $40 you have to have it released after hours. So in that example, it'd be $805 just for having it towed and stored for a day for a regular vehicle, and $5 short of $1,995 for an electric vehicle, and that is not including the additional spots around the electric vehicle that you may have today. The third example is major collision with the rollover that I actually saw on Market Street earlier this week. As I was going home, there's a rollover vehicle in the center. That would be lined up with this, that would be with your crash wrap, extra vehicle, those types of things. It's $1,605 for a regular vehicle, $1,795 for an electric vehicle. So you can see that the cost goes up dramatically. They can actually implement all of the changes that they're requesting. That doesn't mean they're not there without merit. That just means if you put them all in there at once, you're going to significantly impact the amount that your consumers and your citizens are going to have to pay just to get their vehicle out of storage, even if it's just for a day.
How many companies are in the organization? No.
I do not know that. The department makes the rotation record list. Right. Do they get 40 or 41 at points? It's got a lot more than yeah. We allow people on the rotation record list for, and some actually were in the process of taking off of you or look at the possibility of taking off of you because they actually register multiple different situations. And so that they can get into all this more to us. And so that's actually one of the things we're looking at. But yeah, so it's a lot. It's a lot. So if we look to the next page, this will give you just an idea of what other places. With the city of Greenville and Durham, most of us. Greenville has got a 280 max. Durham's got 225, 325, and 50. It's a danger.
situation or not, but with these other needs, we're already in line or even slightly below, some were slightly below, some were slightly over, but Greenville, it ranges from 320 to 525. With just basic storage we've been talking about, and in Durham, it ranges from 295 to 395. If you have no extra storage. So we're right in line currently with our comparators. That doesn't mean we can't go up some. I did have someone ask me, well, how much would it be? If you, on the next page, you can see, if you have AAA, basic membership is $66 a year, and within 10 miles, you get a free code. So, so a lot of people are, you know, you're going to pay a significant amount with city regulated tows. The rules and regulations that Mr. Rothbard mentioned, is on the next page for the ones that they requested. It was a total of 34 requested for the emails that they wanted to pay. Some of those are minor, and some of them are even already kind of included in our contract, which is why we're going to pass that out to you, just so you can have that for reference. Some of them, we have no problem adding them in. It'd be easy to do, saying that because we already require some type of application to be on the list. Which it requires specifically that you have all the current lighting and equipment in working order. That's not a problem to add that in there. A valid license, limited driving privilege not being allowed, requirements specifically for turn over personal effects. Those are all easy, kind of located pretty out of those rules and regulations. We'll certainly add those into our contract. We just don't specify them right now, but it shouldn't be a problem. However, the next paragraph is what you're asking about, Councilman Rothbard, about what you think might disparately impact some smaller tow companies. One of the requirements they requested is a physical office space and storage facility that is separate from the residents of the tow company. We have a lot of smaller tow companies who just have one record and they've got a lot beside their house. That's an extra lot that they owe, and they can maybe keep 10, vehicles or something in there. And so a lot of those mom and pop one truck places would not be able to have a physical office and storage facility separate from the residents. They also requested no sharing of office space, vehicles, or storage facilities. There's a possibility now it would be allowed for like 3 separate tow companies to go in and rent one warehouse and share that, store all of their vehicles there, and that way they have more space and it wouldn't and you can share those. So one of the requests was not being able to, so that would also, I believe, impact some of those smaller companies that are sharing those spaces in the market.
How would it impact the companies that are filing under 3 different names? Would they all have to get it?
No, we are definitely going to try and get rid of those. All the ones that are filing.
Well, this rule would kind of help get rid of that, wasn't it?
Well, it would, we can certainly, add another rule that would specifically say that you can only put one company on the rotation. That's not a problem. It's the sharing of no sharing of office space that would be an issue. They also wanted restrictions on criminal records of the owner and the drivers of the tow companies. The city itself just internally has tried to move away from, having to check that box for some of the things that are manual labor required. I mean, obviously, we have requirements for some of our people as far as criminal background checks, but for a tow truck driver, we would consider that almost like a RTS worker or something like that. We do not require that box to be checked internally as a city, and so I believe that would probably impede some of our smaller companies as well. Also a requirement of 24-hour availability of the tow company. The smaller companies do not have 24-hour availability. This is a common pop situation. They order them, they tell us when they're what their hours are, and if it's outside of hours, we just skip it and go on to the next person, and they do that at their own understanding. So this requirement would make them have someone available 24 hours, and many of them just do not have that availability.
So those would be some of the things that we would, not recommend. So, we have had several of the larger companies come forward, that we have, they are asking for this regularly.
It's like an informal association.
Calls go up.
Yeah, yes, and it's more of the larger, ones, not the small ones that are asking.
Good.
Meredith, I assume for the requirement to turn over personal effects to carve out the vehicles involved in a
Yes.
commission of a crime.
Yes, that actually, is included in there. We'll be part of it. Yeah, in there. Because there are specific tows, PD will let them know if it's being towed or impounded or evidence or whatever. And that is one of the other situations where we call a tow if you're picked up for DUI or something where you cannot drive your vehicle away from the city.
Can a citizen call the city towing? I mean, how would only,
These are city initiatives.
only?
And so, the next page is our recommendations, which I'll ask the recommendation from our perspective. We did talk to our insurance, folks who do management. Like I said, $250,000 was our initial, just because that was consistent. But, we would not have an issue reducing that to 150 across the board instead of 250. So that'd be 250 for, Lucan Cargo. That is the same as the highway patrol for larger vehicles. They differentiate with insurance requirements or different size vehicles. I don't recommend doing that just because it complicates things. So I would be okay with going to 150. Also 150 in garage keeper, 1,200, so that's not far off that. And then 150,000 for garage keeper. So basically, it would cut their insurance requirements by about 40%. So I don't think there's a problem with that. Our insurance carrier doesn't think there's a problem with that. We could also increase the base rotation tow charges, instead of 200 to 250 to 350 to about 250 to 300, and do another $50 increase for that. We can increase our after hour release fee from 45 to 50. That would be consistent with Greenville and Durham that we looked at. I would request inserting a max tow charge. I suggested 500 because I think that's consistent with all of our other comparators. So you could use these additional charges, some of the additional charges if you want, but the max tow would be 500. That would be my suggestion. And that way you can say that you can get up to $500 for each tow, but we're not gonna, chip away at the citizens with another $75 here, another $100 there for every single one. I would suggest no difference for electric vehicles, understanding the concerns raised by Ms. Ravengard.
Not by me. I'm just the messenger.
No, understood. I'm just, with our comparators, again, no one else does that, and it's just an additional thing that would be involved in our rectification process. And so I would just, for that reason, also not recommend making that difference. But I think that the fact that there is increased evidence of issues with EVs that are towed, that would help justify going up on the base charge to the next level. And so that would help with that. We can incorporate some of the rules and regulations into our current contract, but those ones that we specifically mentioned that would, in my opinion, disparately impact smaller tow companies, I would advise leaving that stuff. But I think we can certainly add a lot of the other things that were on that list. So there's my recommendation. I go through whatever council would like to do and whatever general consensus you have. I'd be glad to. Then I would have my office contact, work with the PD and the tow companies to let them know what the changes were going to be and to everything else.
It said something about their insurance goes up, like the guy was saying, it costs me, 100% or whatever.
Their insurance is going up because we're requiring them to pay more. And so
Oh, okay.
we were requiring them to have a $250,000 insurance policy for each of these.
Oh, okay.
And so if we only required them to have 150,000 instead of 250, then they'll be able to get the rates lower.
Well, I think in addition, he was also talking about their liability that they have regardless of whether they work in the city or not.
In general.
I think a lot of people look at these guys as nothing but a bunch of cowboys out there running around trying to do you, and they're not. That's a legitimate business. Let me ask this question. Does anybody know what, I don't even know, I think my insurance policy, every 6 months, I get a sheet showing what all it covers, but it covers, towing, doesn't it?
Depends on your policy.
Most
It's an option.
And there are caps.
This is amount.
How much the policy will say, like $500, it'll pay for a total of $500.
The real issue is the other guy. Because when, I remember we talked about this, and one thing we said was, we need to put a sign where it says no parking and say this is not city. Because when people get told, what we get phone calls from, is they're thinking that we told them, it's our bill.
I'm gonna tell them all you.
Lots that have towing are required to do that. And there are requirements if you are towing from a private lot, in an apartment complex or something like that, they're required to have signs up. And you were probably talking about this, but they are, but they're required to have the name of the tow truck operator and a number that you can call. Some people just don't pay attention to those things. But they are required to have those, and we do that as well in our city lots, where we tow.
I'm good with your proposal. I think it's reasonable. And there's no requirement that these tow truck owners have to work.
Correct, there's no requirement that this is a voluntary.
But they are performing a good service to the city. They do a good job of keeping it clean. We don't want to abuse them. So I think it was a good compromise. And I appreciate you bringing it up.
And what they were asking for.
Yes, these are, my recommendations are, it's not everything that they ask for, but it's. Then we have the forest. I'll be happy.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you.
Are we getting a rest? You can pass it. Okay, thank you. You're welcome.
Tony, what do you need from us?
I think all that we need from you right now is a little direction on the mid-year adjustments. If you expect something back from staff on a future agenda, you need to instruct us to do that, whether that's today, whether that's another day, that's up to you. But that's the only thing.
Cover that real quick again, on the mid-year adjustment, just what the number is.
Well, the mid-year, the total mid-year adjustment is about 2.35. Yeah, 2.35. That's for all of them. And it's, I'm sorry. I don't-
4 point.
No, I'm trying to, thank you. Thank you. For police and fire only, it would be essentially 1.6 million.
For mid-year.
For the mid-year adjustment. Again, it carries forward to next year, has implications.
It's a fund balance, but right now, if we're going to say we're going to do police and fire right now, make a change, it'd be 1.6 taken out of fund balance. Correct.
Yes, sir. And if you do the grounds technicians, turf grass workers, and all other employees, it winds up being 2.35.
On the big one again?
2.35.
So either 1.6 or
2.35. Yes, sir.
2.35.
But then it rolls in, then it's part of the larger budget process in 2026. So we've got an additional $4.7 million.
Right.
That we have to figure out how to fund.
Next year.
Now, 1.6 will. It won't roll in next year.
It will.
It will, okay.
It'll be 3 point, the 1.6 this year for public safety only becomes $3.1 million at the beginning of the fiscal year next year.
Okay.
The 2.35 becomes 4.7.
I got it.
You will, I'm sorry, and you will see an adjustment regardless of whether you, if you just do fire and police, you will see an adjustment in June for regular employees.
I want to ask in front of the full group a question that I asked Tony and Laura during one of our breaks. If we're looking at pages 35 and 27. So page 27 shows us with this sort of ladder hybrid where we would add a senior police officer position and rank and a senior firefighter rank, essentially doing the ladder for hourly wages. That shows us a $900,000 figure. And then on page 35, if we look at doing an adjustment for grounds techs, turf grass workers, RTS, which is also hourly, that's a $92,000 adjustment. Can you talk me through what our options to do that today would look like? And whether or not that $900,000 is a fair figure when we're considering the not leapfrogging.
Are you talking about the senior officer and the senior firefighter? You would need to do the initial step of the compression issue. And we talked on break, and most of that is in the upper ranks. So if you didn't do anything else and you wanted to do that, you would at least need to fix the upper ranks in those areas where you're having the most compression.
And we do not have a number for fixing only the upper ranks. We can get you that number if that's what you want.
But you would need to at least do some portion of that overall 3.1 million of public safety in order to do the 900,000.
What David is asking for clarity purposes is if you institute the senior firefighter and senior police officer, what would you have to do in the upper ranks to adjust it so that you wouldn't have the compression issue, but it would not necessarily address the entry level positions? Is that correct?
Well, no, that wasn't my understanding. That wasn't my understanding either.
Okay.
It sort of seems to me, I was hoping that we could find a way to move forward today where we were looking at hourly wages for public safety as well as for what shows on page 35. Because I was surprised and happy with the fact that that number was less than 100,000 and that we can maybe make that adjustment relatively smoothly. But it sounds like we actually don't have sufficient information to do that today. Because back on page 27, that was not for a mid-year adjustment. That was what you would build into next year's budget.
That would be to do just the change to senior. Yeah, we don't have it broken out by hourly right now for public safety. And really, that would just increase the compression issues we have in the upper range if you just increase the lower ranks in public safety, which is where we found, if you remember the benchmarking data, we were having the biggest issues in the upper ranks, not the lower ranks.
Okay. And I appreciate y'all talking with me about that during the break. There's some time had passed and I thought it was an idea we should float. Everybody should hear.
Okay. So if you don't have direction today, there will be no action, nothing brought forward for you at a future meeting until you provide us direction.
With the understanding that you're going to come forward with the next budget.
Yes.
Of a 4.7, what is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
4.7.
Yes.
Is it 4.7 or is it 5.6? Because we have that $900,000.
It'll be more than that because it also include whatever increases in insurance and stuff for next year.
So you're talking about the whole full spectrum of everything that's been presented.
We bring some piece of that next year as part of the budget process. We would go back and rework the numbers. To Clayton's point, we'd have to refresh them for July 1st, put our recommendation in and then put the insurance in. I'm sorry,
Well, as importantly, depending on how big the bite is.
Yeah.
Some of the might not come forward. Okay. Depending on how big the bite is and what it takes to balance that budget without a tax increase, some of that may not come forward. For example, the health insurance increases or decreases for employees, increases for the city. We would just have to look at the numbers. As Councilman Waddell has said over and over again, it is a fluid process and we are still, and as Laura reminds us, we are very early in the process.
But you're looking for direction on whether or not we want to do right now. We don't do anything right now.
If you don't give us direction today, it will be status quo until you give us additional direction. And status quo is what you adopted with your budget back in June.
When we adopted our budget in June, did not include
any of what's in front of you.
No.
Yes, sir.
We adopted it all now. in my mind, that makes the budget process going into this next year's budget a little smoother because you start to see the implications of that dollar figure,
It clears up the roadmap. Yes, sir.
right? And whether or not it's,
Does it make it any easier? No, sir, it does not, but that's part of budgeting. So that's what's expected, but does it make the roadmap clearer? Yes, sir, it does.
But it also reduces our options.
Well, you've taken one off the table. That's,
It reduces your options, or opposite side of that coin, may give you more options to look at later to be able to pick and choose.
Tony, what's one set on the property tax rate now?
About 2.3.
Almost 2.4.
How much?
Almost 2.4.
And of course, that will change with evaluation. But it'll still produce relatively about the same. And if it's too much to digest right now, we stand ready at any time you're ready to provide.
Next budget meeting?
The next budget meeting is not until March, but you can provide this direction at any meeting at which occurs.
like in a normal council meeting, we can say.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Under other items.
Digest this.
It's a lot to digest.
It's a tremendous amount based on what we did last year.
Yes, sir.
And I am very sensitive to that.
Yes, sir.
And I hope everybody here understands that, but we did 2.5.
I understand that.
I just,
And the later in the year you wait to give this adjustment, of course, the less money there is in the employee pocket, but the less money comes out of fund balance. So for example, if you decided in March that you were going to do a pay adjustment in April, it would be a quarter of these amounts as opposed to half of these amounts. But I don't really think immediate impact. I don't think that's really the question, because fund balance is healthy enough to withstand whatever you want to do for the rest of the year.
I mean, if we have to make, if we make it, yeah, do it at any time.
Yes.
I just don't like to roll this one just a little bit on.
Okay.
Nothing, I mean, like safety fence, I know that they're last one. I just want to roll it.
I understand that completely. Believe.
And I will just reiterate my standpoint, the public safety, the police and fire was what was driving this conversation. While I tried to bring it forward originally, I still believe that there was consensus in that last meeting that we were going to go ahead and do something for them mid-year. I think we've made a lot of progress on some of the other items, and I appreciate that. I know that's a small lift. But this is something that's these guys are putting their lives on the line with the city every day. And not that everybody's not doing important work here. And I think we're looking to something more holistic moving into 26. But I'm a little bit up in mind to go ahead and just pull the trigger on police and fire right now.
Me too. And the reason I say that, I've not been forced into that conversation. I mean, this is something I've been, for all these years, it always looms large. Our first responders, and it's kind of like the definition of insanity. We keep doing the same things over and over and over. We're sitting here at the table year in and year out with the same situation. And they are the ones that presented and marched it out. I've met with them. And I would agree with Luke. I think I'd like to pull the trigger on first responders.
I want to add one other thing, and this is sort of specific to police, but I feel like there are a lot of times that we have to say no, or at least we feel like we have to say no because of the vacancies that we have in the police department. I'm thinking about the social district. I'm thinking about traffic enforcement, where it's not as simple as, it's not just an HR issue. It's the difference in the function that that department serves in my mind.
Absolutely.
You see it firsthand.
Does this require action, or are you still just looking for 4 people?
Technically speaking, any one of you could ask for it to be placed on a future agenda. If we get consensus from you today as to whether or not what you want to do, we will place it on the next agenda and you will ratify that one way or the other. But absent consensus direction as to how to move forward, we will not take any action until such time as directed or asked to do so.
Too late to get it on Tuesday's agenda.
Absolutely, yes, sir. I'm already on the warpath about that one.
My intention is still to move forward with police and fire immediately and move forward with the entirety and the continuation of our budget process.
If that's a motion,
You don't need a motion. If there's a consensus for council to entertain that at a future agenda, we will prepare that as soon as
Seems
possible.
like it's yes, yes, yes. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. No. So it doesn't look like that.
Yeah, that's not the same we want to bring forward.
I know it is. I know it is.
Yes, sir.
I just want to, I want to, I think I need to have a little bit more personally. I will ask you for some specific items I want to take a look at as to what we're going to try to open up, what we're going to hold back on, what we're not. I think the ones of us that voted for that budget last year that made that call, I think I have the right to ask that question because this is going to be serious as to what we're going to talk. And I just want to make certain that I'm making the right decision because we already made a tax increase last year.
You always, every one of you always have the right to question.
I thought that's what the workshop was for.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
I'm not questioning it. No. I'm questioning it, right? I'm saying we're questioning it now, so we'll beat it on the thing. Yeah, I need to wait a little bit.
I just want to see what we're going to cut.
Because I'm interested in, like you said earlier, everybody.
We will wait. The staff will not move forward with a resolution unless asked to do so by one or more members of this council. And ask for it to be placed on the agenda. Fair enough?
Likely we'll see it on an agenda soon.
We have lunch downstairs for you. It is available on the second floor in the training room. So if you go down on the elevators,
You don't go to the second floor.
go south. I won't say go right or go left because depending on which elevator you go down in, but go south in the building and turn to the west and it'll be there on your left. And thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it very much.
Ad hoc, we go back up there.
Ad hoc will be back up here at 1 o'clock. Yes, sir.
Well, yeah, we didn't set a time, but.
Okay, as soon as you get done, and as soon as I get done with my staff and get them out of here.
Oh, how long you do that for? Well, we said we could be very efficient,
Yes,
45 minutes.
yes, if staff could stay.
And,
Yes, staff stays.
we'll have,
Otherwise, we can be quick.
update some all the projects you want to know about where they are and all. So I give you, we have every one of those identified. We have some conversation, early indication when you may want to.
Well, they're gonna miss out on a few minutes of it anyway, because I gotta do a wrap up here. Again, thank you very much, council members.
You already adjourned, Mary?
Mayor has to.